After my parents refused to help babysit and compared my children to my sister's kids, I stopped helping them with free house repairs. The following day, my phone burst. Thanksgiving was intended to be a time for family, excellent food, and a reprieve from reality. But it turned out to be a disaster. We were all gathered at my parents' new property, which I had spent the previous 2 months renovating for them. They had asked me to do it, so I accepted. New floors, plumbing repairs, repainting, and electrical work. I spent every free hour there, covered in dust and sweat, ensuring that everything was flawless. Meanwhile, they sat peacefully in their flat, waiting for the house to be completed. I did not complain. They were my parents, and helping them was the right thing to do. In exchange, I had requested only one thing: occasional babysitting. Not every day, not every weekend, only when I needed it. My wife died a few years ago, and I was doing my best to raise my children alone. But sometimes I needed assistance. I believed it made sense, and they had always agreed, until that night. We were in the middle of supper when my father laid down his fork and said, "We're not going to babysit your kids anymore." I assumed he was kidding, but his expression was serious. The table became quiet. Then, he went on to imply that they were exhausted, that my children were too much, and worst of all, compared them to my sister's children. He mentioned how well behaved, quiet, and easy they were, unlike mine. I looked over to my sister. She didn't say anything, just sat there smiling. Something inside of me twisted. I'd spent 2 months fixing up her house for free. They had never had to lift a finger. And now they were telling me that my children, were a burden to them, that they weren't as good as my sisters. I took a big breath and tried to hold it together. Then I said, "Really? I'll stop fixing your house." There was silence. My father just looked at me like I had hit him. My mother stepped in and tried to smooth things over. She started talking about how I didn't realize how difficult it was for them and how much they had done for me. She made it appear as if I was pushing them to do unpaid work, while in reality, I had barely asked for anything. Before I could react, several of our other relatives spoke up. They did not like it. One of my aunts remarked it was foolish to talk about my children in that manner, especially in front of them. Another uncle pointed out how much I had already done for my parents, thereby saving them thousands of dollars on repairs. My sister remained mute, soaking all the accolades for her wonderful children. I stood up. "Thank you for a great Thanksgiving dinner," I told you. "I'm extremely grateful for everything." I then turned to my children and informed them that we were going. We collected our coats and hurried to the car, leaving a table filled with startled expressions. That night, my children questioned me why their grandparents had said those things, and why they were constantly comparing them to their cousins. I moaned and stroked my cheek. The world isn't always fair, and sometimes grandparents aren't the nicest people. They gazed at me, expecting for more, so I made sure to express what was most important. "But I love you both more than anything." I went to bed, weary. I had no regrets, but it hurt nonetheless. The next morning, I had 52 missed calls from my parents. When I saw 52 missed calls, I assumed something horrible had happened. My stomach dropped. I instantly called my mother back, half expecting to hear about an emergency. Instead, as soon as she answered the phone, she began ranting, as if I had personally set fire to her home. "John, you need to come over right now," she urged. I frowned. "Why? What happened?" She skirted the question and insisted that I come over. My father also got on the phone, his tone tense but controlled. "Just come, John. We need to talk." I was not foolish. I knew exactly what this was about, but I knew I had to leave nonetheless. My children still had some belongings in their house, and I did not want to leave them behind. So I informed them that I'd be there in an hour. When I got inside their flat, I knew things hadn't calmed down overnight. My mother was pacing. My father was standing in the kitchen with his arms crossed. And my sister, who had seemingly decided to become even more involved, was seated on the couch as if she were moderating a presidential discussion. It began immediately as I closed the door behind me. My mother leaped in first. "John, don't you think you overreacted?" I stared at her. "Overreacted?" My father jumped in. Look, we're sorry if we hurt your feelings, but you can't just refuse to finish the house because of this. I nearly laughed. There it was. That was what this was all about, not the family or the children, but the house. I shake my head. So let me get this straight. You call my kids a burden, say they're too much for you, compare them to my sister's kids in front of everyone. And now when I say, I won't do the work you asked me to do for free, I'm the problem? My mother placed her palm on her chest, as if I had just badly offended her. That's not fair, John. We have done a lot for you. We took care of your kids for years. My sister has finally spoken up. Mom, Dad, you really shouldn't compare the kids like that. For the first time, my parents seemed astonished. My mother blinked at her. You don't think we were right? My sister shrugged. It's not about being right. You just shouldn't have said it in front of the kids. It's not okay. I must admit, I didn't expect her to say that. She wasn't exactly defending me, but she wasn't supporting them either. Instead of backing down, my father turned back to me. John, we just want this to be over. You're not going to cut us off over something so small. I looked him dead in the eyes. Watch me. My mother gasped, as if I had threatened to place her in a nursing home. My father began to say something else, but I was done. I went to the closet, got my children's clothes, and proceeded out the door. And that was when my mother said it. John, you're being selfish. I paused. Selfish? After 2 months of free labor? After bending over backwards to help them? After never complaining about all the times they needed something from me? I turned around. Selfish? You want me to work on your house, but you won't even look after your own grandchildren? You want my time, my effort, my energy, but the second I need something, it's suddenly too much for you. My mother opened her mouth to respond, but I was finished. You don't have to babysit anymore, but I don't have to fix your house either. Then I walked out. That was only the beginning. Things worsened during the next few weeks. First, they attempted to force me to return. Then they attempted to guilt me. Then they begged, because they had a serious situation. Hiring professionals would cost a fortune, and the longer I ignored them, the more desperate they became. But just when I thought they couldn't get any more manipulative, something happened that changed everything. For the first few days following the incident, I ignored their calls. I ignored their text messages as well. Then began the guilt trip. First, my mother gave the typical, "We're getting old, John. We won't be around forever" spiel. Then my father wrote me a long note about family loyalty and how I was being unreasonable over a minor misunderstanding. Meanwhile, my sister remained relatively silent. I assumed she was trying to stay out of it, but at least she spoke up briefly during the debate. Then, about a week after Thanksgiving, the first received a message from my father that made me laugh. John, we forgive you. Can you come finish the house this weekend? Forgive me. I did not even respond. That's when they changed their strategy. At first, they tried to bribe me. My mother called to say they'd start babysitting again if I finished the house. I told her no. My father then texted me that they'd be willing to help with the kids if I came over to talk things out. I told him no. Then they sent my sister to try. She called one night and began with light conversation, inquiring about my children. Then she spoke casually. Maybe you should just finish the house. They're being stubborn, but it's probably easier if you just get it done. I laughed. So I do free labor, and in return, they insult my kids. And you think I'm the one who should back down? She paused. I mean, it's their house, John. They're just stuck in their ways. You know how they are. I do. That's why I'm not doing it. She exhaled. Look, I get it. Okay, but they're never going to admit they were wrong. They're our parents. That struck me. She knew they were mistaken. She wasn't even attempting to dispute it, but she knew they'd never say it aloud. I told her I had to leave and hung up. That night, I considered everything. About how for years I had done things for them without expecting anything in return. About how they had never showed me genuine appreciation. They acted as if it was my responsibility to help them, but an inconvenience to help me. And I determined I was finished, completely. That was the night I blocked their numbers. 2 days later, my sister arrived at my place unexpectedly. I opened the door and noticed her standing there, looking embarrassed. "We need to talk," she said. I allowed her inside. She sat down at my kitchen table and stared at me for a moment. Then she sighed. "They called the contractor," she explained. It astonished me. "Good. So they finally got someone to do it?" She grimaced. "Yeah. But there's a problem." I waited. "They got scammed." I blinked. She nodded. "Dad hired some guy off Facebook because he was cheaper than a real company. Paid him up front, and now he's gone. Took the money and disappeared." I couldn't help it. I laughed. My sister shot me a glance. "John, they lost $10,000. I stopped laughing. $10? Wait. Where did they even get that much money? "They borrowed some of it," she told me, "from family." That part took me off guard. "Who?" I asked. She hesitated before saying, "Uncle Mark, Aunt Linda, even Grandma." I sat back. They borrowed from other individuals to avoid acknowledging they needed me. And now, they were $10,000 in debt, with a half-finished house. I shake my head. "That's not my problem." My sister nodded slowly. "I know, and I told them that." That made me pause. "You what?" She exhaled. "I told them they should have just apologized to you, that they did this to themselves." For the first time in this disaster, I felt a shift. My sister, their favorite and golden kid, had actually spoken up for me. She leaned forwards. "John, they're desperate. They want you to come back. They're still being stubborn, but they know they messed up." I crossed my arms. She shrugged. "And I think you should make them beg." Hearing my sister say that threw me off. She had always been their favorite, the one they admired and supported. And now she told me to make them beg? I raised an eyebrow. "You really think they'll do that?" She flashed me a half-smile. "They don't have a choice?" For the first time in my life, I felt in control. I slumped back in my chair. "So what exactly do they want from me?" She exhaled. "They want you to come over and talk." I laughed. "Yeah, I've heard that before." She nodded. "I know, but this time they're not in control. You are." And she was correct. I did not go that day. I did not go the following day either. I let them sit in their messes. Allow them to sweat. A few days later, my mother broke. She wrote a rambling text that was part apology and part excuse. She admitted that they may have been unjust and should not have said what they did. But what is the funniest part? "We should have handled things differently, but you also overreacted." I genuinely laughed when reading it. Even when they were desperate, they had to assign some blame. I ignored the message. Then my father tried. His response was simpler. "John, we need you. Come back and finish the house. We'll figure everything else out later. No apologies. Just say, we need you." I also overlooked that. The next night, my sister called. "Okay," she said. "I think they're actually breaking this time. What happened?" "They told me to tell you they're sorry." I blinked. "Wait, they actually said that?" She paused. "Well, they told me to tell you. Not in those exact words," but I exhaled. "Close enough." She then said something that astonished me. "They asked if I thought you'd ever speak to them again." That made me pause. For the first time, I realized they were truly terrified. They were concerned not only about the house, but also that they had pushed me too far. Honestly, they had. I agreed to meet with them, not because I wanted to, but because I wanted to hear from them. I told my sister I'd come over on my own terms. When I walked into their apartment, they seemed less confident and more apprehensive. My mother had been crying. My father looked fatigued. I sat, crossed my arms, and waited. Finally, my father sighed. "We messed up, John." That was as close to an apology as I was going to receive. He went on to say how they didn't plan to hurt me, but were frustrated, exhausted, and stressed that the home had gotten overbearing, and that they had spoken inappropriately. Then my mother finally spoke. Her voice was quiet. "We love you and the kids." And for the first time, I believed her. I waited for them to be silent for a bit before saying, "I'm not finishing your house." My mother gasped, like if I'd slapped her. My father tensed. "John," he answered. I cut him off. "You had 2 months of free labor from me. You had help whenever you needed it, and the one thing I asked for in return was too much for you. Now I'm done. I'm not angry anymore, but I'm not fixing your house." Silence. My mother seemed to want to quarrel, but she didn't. My father stared at the table. My sister was just watching. Then I stood up. "But I'm willing to move forward if you stop treating me like I owe you something. If you stop treating my kids like they're less than my sisters. And if you understand that from now on, if I help you, it's because I want to, not because you expect it." They nodded, because they had no other option. I left that day feeling I'd won. And for the first time in a long while, I felt liberated. Things did not suddenly improve following the meeting. My parents were not suddenly better people, and I wasn't foolish enough to believe they wouldn't try to push the boundaries again. But something had changed. They realized I wasn't going to be their handyman, backup plan, or safety net. They were afraid because they knew I was about to walk away. For a few weeks, there were no needless phone calls or guilt trips, only silence. It was nearly calm. Then, one afternoon, I received a text from my mother. "Can we take the kids this weekend? We missed them." I stared at the text for a moment. This was the same woman who had referred to them as a burden, and had made comparisons to my sister's children in their presence. Had she suddenly missed them? I tried to dismiss it, but I remembered my children. So I asked her, "Do you want to go?" They paused. My youngest, Ben, appeared hesitant. My oldest, Emily, crossed her arms. "Are they going to be weird again?" I was honest. Maybe. They thought about it. Then Emily shrugged. "I guess we can go." So I quickly said, "Sure, I'll drop her off at 5. My parents were not the same that weekend when I dropped her off. My mother seemed extremely kind, as if she was trying too hard to show she wasn't the bad guy. My father was silent. I stayed for a few minutes, just enough to ensure my children's comfort. Then before I left, my father pulled me aside. "We really love them, John," he remarked. "We just messed up." It wasn't a full apology, but for my father, it was as close as I could get. I just nodded. "Good. Then don't mess up again." Later that night, I received a call from my sister. "I have to tell you something," she said. Her voice conveyed seriousness. "What is it?" She exhaled. "Mom told me something the other day about why she stopped babysitting." I sat upright. "Because they were tired, right?" She paused. "No, that wasn't it. At least not the whole reason." I frowned. "What was it?" She took a deep breath. "You were jealous, John?" I blinked. "Jealous of what?" She paused. "Of you. Of how much the family stood by you at Thanksgiving. Of how close you are with your children. About how you became the center of attention when they're used to it being me. That really threw me." "That doesn't even make sense." "It does to them," she explained. "You felt like you lost control, like people were looking at you as the good son, the responsible one, and that pissed them off." I sat there, trying to digest everything. My parents were more than just tired of babysitting, they were bitter. I'm bitter because I was a nice father. It was wild. It was sad. And that just reinforced one thing for me: they would never really change. I did not inform my parents what my sister said. It wouldn't have altered anything, but I did modify how I handled them from that point forward. Everything was on my terms. When they wanted to see the children, only if my kids wanted to. If they needed my assistance with something, they had to ask, not assume. If they ever disrespected my children again, that was it. No more chances. And the best part, they knew. For the first time in my life, I was not simply their son. I was someone they needed to respect. And that was worth everything. For a while, everything remained polite. My folks were on their best behavior. They didn't push, guilt me, or ask me for help around the house anymore. It was almost as if they had finally understood, until they hadn't. My aunt contacted me one Sunday afternoon and asked, "John, did you see what your mom posted on Facebook?" It was never a pleasant sentence to hear. When I opened the app, there was a lengthy, dramatic post from my mother about how family members should always help one another, and how some people forget where they came from. After everything we've done, it's heartbreaking to see our own son turn his back on us. She did not mention my name, but everyone understood who she was talking about. And the best part? She concluded, "At least we still have our amazing daughter who never left us." That was it. That was it. I was done. I didn't text or phone her. I wrote a simple response to the post. "You're right, Mom. Family should help each other. That's why I spent 2 months fixing your house for free, while you sat in your apartment. That's why I asked for nothing in return, except that you treat my kids with basic respect. And when you called them a burden and compared them to my sister's children, I realized that you don't want a family. You want servants. And I'm not playing that role anymore." I pressed submit and saw the torrents open. The first comment came from my uncle. "Wow. I didn't know the whole story. This is messed up." Then my aunt. "John is right. You took advantage of him. He gave you everything and you repaid him by insulting his children. Unbelievable." Then my grandmother, the one from whom they borrowed money. "You told me you needed the money because John refused to help you. But you never told me why. Now, I see the truth." Comment after comment sided with me, and the best one came from my sister. "I love Mom and Dad, but John is telling the truth. They treated him unfairly, and he has every right to leave." My golden sister, the one they always favored and supported, didn't defend them. I sat back and watched my parents' reputations crumble in real time. About an hour later, the post was deleted. My mother tried to call, but I didn't answer. She then texted, "Was that necessary?" I responded, "Was your mail necessary?" There was nothing. A few days later, my father caved in. He simply wrote, "We were wrong. We're sorry. No excuses, no blame." And frankly, I didn't need anything else. I never worked on their home again. They had to hire someone at full price. I would never let them shame me into anything again. If they wanted to see my kids, it was because they wanted to, not because they forced it. And what's the biggest change? They never compared my children to my sister's children again, because they knew if they did, it would be their final time seeing her. I had placed them in their place, and for the first time, they realized it. I'd won. I suspected my wife was planning a divorce, so I moved my assets. 2 weeks later, she filed, then backtracked when her plan backfired. Hello everyone. Before we start today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thank you very much. Now, let's begin the video. Hello people. I've been skimming through the posts here for a while, believing I'd never have my own tale to tell. However, life has a way of shocking you. And I've been lugging this about for months. I need to let it out. Let me be clear. I've never been the sort to jump to conclusions or assume the worst. My wife, let's call her M, and I have been together for 6 years and married for 4. Things were solid, or so I thought. We experienced the typical ups and downs, but nothing that made me think, "Oh, there's a problem here." In reality, throughout the majority of our relationship, we were that couple, completely committed colleagues. We laughed at stupid inside jokes, argued for hours about which movie to watch, and had a cadence that just worked. She'd organize elaborate date nights, and I'd treat her to her favorite takeout after a long day. It felt effortless, as if we had figured out the whole love thing. That is why what occurred next struck me like a ton of bricks. The shift around 6 months ago, things began to alter. At first, it was minor details. Things you'd likely miss if you weren't paying attention. She began carrying her phone everywhere, even when she was only going to the kitchen or folding clothes. Before this, her phone would sit on the coffee table for hours, and she didn't mind who picked it up. One day, I made this joke. "What, are you running some secret spy ring now?" She chuckled and added, "No, work's been emailing me a lot." Okay, fine. But a few days later, she created a password. That one caught me off surprise, because she had never used it before. When I casually inquired why, she responded something vague about security and hackers. I didn't press it since I didn't want to appear paranoid, but it simply felt off. And it did not end there. She began taking calls outside the room, which she had never done before. It wasn't subtle either. Her phone would ring, and she'd say, "Oh, let me just grab this real quick," before disappearing into the bedroom or outside on the porch. If I inquired who it was, she would just say, "Just a friend from work." Then I noticed a new habit, keeping her phone face down on the table. I had no idea that was a thing until I reached over to give her something, and she hastily moved her phone out of the way. It was one of those blink and you miss it moments, yet it stayed with me. Growing distance. However, it wasn't all about the phone. She started to feel distant. Conversations that used to flow easily now felt like pulling teeth. If I brought up future plans, such as where should we go for our anniversary, or do you think we should start saving for a new car, she'd simply nod and say, "Yeah, we'll see," before shifting the subject. It all came together for me on a random Wednesday. She informed me that she was seeing a buddy for coffee after work. It didn't sound strange. She does that occasionally. I happened to be running errands in the same area, so I figured, why not surprise her? It will be cute. When I arrived, however, she was not with her friend. She stood outside the cafe, walking back and forth, her phone placed against her ear. I remained in my car because something about the way she spoke seemed serious. I didn't intend to eavesdrop, but I overheard phrases like, "It's almost ready and starting fresh soon." My stomach sank. I couldn't figure out what she was saying, but it didn't sound like job or friend conflict. It sounded grander, like something she had planned. When she returned home, I asked her how her coffee date went, attempting to maintain a casual tone. She told me a complete narrative about her pal complaining about her boyfriend. It was such an unexpected comment that I just gazed at her for a second. "What do you mean?" I inquired. She shrugged. "I just think we should have everything in one place. You know, like all our account info, passwords, documents, that kind of thing, just in case of emergency." I wasn't sure what to say. This was something we'd never discussed before, and the timing seemed strange, given everything else I'd noticed. "What kind of emergencies?" I inquired, attempting to keep my tone casual. She shrugged again. "It's just smart, isn't it? What if something happens to one of us? Or what if we need to make a big financial decision quickly?" Her argument made sense on the surface, but something about the way she expressed it made me nervous. It was too rehearsed and polished, as if she had been waiting for the appropriate time to bring it up. I nodded and murmured something like, "Yeah, I guess that's a good idea," but within, alarms were ringing. Why now? Why are we suddenly concerned about arranging our finances when we've always kept them separate and loose? That night, my mind kept reliving her words, attempting to figure out what it meant. Was this just typical adult behavior, and was I reading too much into it? But then, I remembered the phone calls, the talk I overheard in the cafe, and how distant she'd been recently. It all began to mount up, and I did not like the image it was painting. Until then, I had done nothing about it. A few days later, she mentioned it again. We were in the kitchen. I was making a sandwich, and she was looking through her phone. When she remarked, "Have you thought more about organizing the bank stuff? Like, do you know where all the account details are?" I lowered the knife and turned to face her. "Okay, what's going on?" I inquired, attempting to keep my tone light but firm. "You've been bringing up the finances a lot lately. Is there something we need to talk about?" She finally looked up from her phone, astonished that I had pressed her on it. "No, nothing's wrong," she responded hastily, making me giggle. "I just think it's important. That's all, you know, for emergencies." "Emergencies? Like what?" She shrugged, her expression unreadable. "I don't know. Just life stuff. It's not a big deal, I promise. I just think it's something we should get on top of." Her response seemed ambiguous. Too vague. I nodded and let it go. But the way she avoided providing a direct answer made me even more suspicious. It didn't seem like a casual suggestion anymore. It felt like she was concealing something, but I had no idea what it was. So the next day, while she was at work, one decided to look into our finances. I opened our joint account online and discovered something unexpected. Over the last month, a few tiny moves had taken place. Nothing large, but small quantities that did not appear to have a clear purpose. They were not designated for bills, groceries, or anything similar. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it appeared that she had been withdrawing money from the account for some reason, which I couldn't figure out. I considered addressing her, but something told me to wait. If I was wrong, I'd look ridiculous. And if I was correct, I had to be careful. It was eating at me, so I contacted someone I trusted, an old college friend who also happens to be a lawyer. I told him what I'd discovered while trying not to sound like a conspiracy theorist. Look, he remarked, after I'd explained everything. I'm not saying something is absolutely going on, but you're not insane for wanting to be ready. If you're concerned about protecting your assets, now is the moment to do so. Better safe than sorry. He walked me through what I could do. Simple procedures to ensure my finances were protected if something happened. I'll admit that taking such drastic action felt out of the ordinary. It felt like I was preparing for something dreadful, even though I wasn't sure what was wrong. But the more I considered it, the more it made sense. If she was really up to something, and I was beginning to suspect she was, I needed to defend myself. It was not an easy decision to make, however. This wasn't just about money or assets. It was about the life we had created together. I kept repeating images in my head. Our wedding day, the late-night conversations about our dreams, and the weird little jokes we shared. How did we arrive here? Is this what our marriage had come to? The prospect of taking these measures felt like conceding defeat, as if I was officially abandoning the trust we previously shared. That evening, while she was out, I sat at my desk and took out my laptop. My hand shook as I opened the computer and began browsing through everything: bank accounts, investment accounts, and the property deed. Each paper I studied felt like a betrayal, but a persistent voice in my head reminded me that this was about survival, not sabotage. I didn't mean to hurt her. I couldn't get rid of the idea that if I didn't act now, I'd regret it later. I compiled a list of everything I could transfer and how to do it without raising suspicion. As I typed, I felt a crushing weight settle against my chest. I had entirely trusted her for years, and now here I was, playing defense against the person I thought would always have my back. Then I called my mother and explained why I needed her help, but not in detail. I need you to hold on to some things for me for a while. It's nothing bad, just something I need to do to protect myself, just in case. She was silent for a minute, likely trying to figure out what I wasn't saying. Are you okay? Her voice was filled with anxiety. Yeah, I lied. It's just a precaution. Nothing to worry about. She didn't press me, but I could hear the pause in her voice when she responded. Of course, sweetheart. Whatever you need. I hung up the phone with an odd mix of relief and shame. I despised engaging her in this mess, but knowing she had my back provided some steadiness in an otherwise chaotic environment. By the time Em arrived home, I had already begun the process. I moved the majority of my assets, our cash, investments, and even the house, to my mother's name. I kept enough in our joint account to keep up appearances, but the rest was locked down. She didn't notice anything. She walked in, kissed my cheek, and asked if I wanted to watch a movie. I appeared okay, but inside I was a wreck. Part of me felt awful, as if I had betrayed her trust, but another part of me felt relieved, as if I was finally gaining control of a situation that had spiraled out of my control. Over the next 3 days, I tried to maintain a normal routine. I didn't want to let her know that anything had changed. She appeared satisfied, even unusually cheery at times. However, rather than putting me at ease, it increased my suspicion. If she was plotting something, she did an excellent job of concealing it. What stood out, however, was that she never brought up the finances again, not even after I questioned her the last time. It was as if the subject had evaporated from her memory. At first, I believed I had overreacted, and she dismissed the subject since it wasn't relevant. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized she was avoiding it, almost as if she was afraid to bring it up again after I pressed her. I noticed her staring at me a few times, as if she was assessing my mood or contemplating whether to say something. Every time I noticed, she'd quickly return her attention to whatever she was doing. Her phone, the TV, a book. It was slight, but it was present. It felt like she was waiting for me to bring it up, as if she didn't want to push the issue again. The silence only made me feel more anxious. It wasn't like her to drop anything she considered essential. and the way she avoided it suddenly appeared deliberate. If she was testing the waters, she was not going in. If she was waiting for something, I was not about to give her the go-ahead. Whatever her next move was, I knew I had to be one step ahead. Something was coming, but I didn't know when or how. All I could do was prepare. That night, I made certain that everything was solid. I glanced over the paperwork again, double-checking every aspect of my mother's asset transfers. The house, the savings, the investments, everything was now legally in her name, sealed in an uncontested trust. I even called her to confirm that she had all of the necessary papers. 2 weeks had passed, and everything appeared normal to normal, frankly. She was acting more loving, even starting to talk about unrelated topics, like jobs or what we should eat for the evening. It threw me off, because she'd been aloof for months avoiding anything more than superficial conversations. Part of me began to question whether I had been overreacting all along. Maybe the strange conduct was merely stress, or something I didn't comprehend. But then, one random Friday night, she sat me down on the couch, turned off the television, and said, "We need to talk." My stomach fell quickly. I knew what she was going to say before she did. "I think we should get a divorce," she replied, her voice so calm it seemed prepared. It wasn't furious or emotional. It was simply frigid, as if she had told me we had run out of milk. I stared at her, unsure how to respond as she explained her argument. She mentioned needing space, wanting to figure herself out, and feeling like she'd lost her identity in the marriage. Standard breakup phrases that didn't really explain anything. But then she said something that struck a different tone. "You know, I've made a lot of sacrifices for you over the years, and I don't think you really appreciate them. I deserve more." That last part stung. It wasn't just that she wanted out. It was that she framed it as if I owed her something. That everything was my fault, and she was simply claiming what was properly hers. As I sat there, trying to understand what she was saying, a new question arose. Why now? Then she said something that made everything start to make sense. "A friend of mine has been helping me see things more clearly," she continued, not looking at me. "A friend." I remained still, letting her speak, but my mind was racing. Who was this friend? Why were they so involved in my marriage? The way she stated it was not casual. It seemed like someone had been hyping her up, convincing her that leaving me wasn't simply a choice, but a strategy she needed to implement. And the more she talked about how she deserved more because of her sacrifices, the more I became skeptical. Sacrifices? What kind of sacrifice? She was happy with me, or so she said. I worked hard to offer her the life she desired, and it wasn't just about money. When she asked to move closer to her job, I agreed, even though it meant a lengthier commute for me. When she wanted to attend that pricey yoga retreat last year, I made sure we budgeted for it. Even foregoing a vacation I was looking forward to, so she could go. I backed her when she changed careers twice, telling her it was fine to take the risk because I wanted her happy. I believed being a decent husband meant putting her first whenever possible. And it wasn't as if I was an unresponsive, distant partner. I showed up. I remembered birthdays and random things she had mentioned loving. When she mentioned feeling caught in a rut, I suggested date nights. I listened to her complain about her job, friends, and family. I didn't always get it right, but I did try. That's why her "I deserve more" line hurt so much. I didn't even consider buying it. She was not upset due to anything I did or did not do. She was upset because something had changed in her. Perhaps it was the acquaintance she kept bringing up or something else. But the lady sitting in front of me was not the woman I married, and I was not going to let her rewrite our marriage tale to fit her new narrative. I didn't press her at the moment. Instead, I nodded and said something innocuous, such as, "If that's how you feel, I guess we should figure out the next steps." She seemed startled that I wasn't arguing or begging her to stay, but I didn't mind. My attention had already changed. I needed to know who or what was causing her sudden planned shift in conduct. She didn't just wake up one day and decide she wanted out. This was something greater, and I wasn't going to let it surprise me any more than it had already. After that chat, she went into her own apartment, and I received the divorce papers on Monday. Let me tell you, They didn't only want to stop the relationship. They were planning to take everything, half the house, my savings, my assets, and the car. She wanted it all, plus some ambiguous spousal support clauses that made little sense given her high salary. It seemed as if she was expecting me to give her all I had worked for. At first, I assumed she was just being vengeful, but the way she articulated her demands, so specific and aggressive, reassured me that she had someone guiding her through this. So I started digging. I couldn't just ask her who she'd been talking to, so I had to be clever. I began with her social media. She hadn't blocked me, and even though she didn't post frequently, I searched through her tagged photographs and comments, looking for someone new. That's when I discovered the pattern. Jake repeatedly liked and commented on her posts. Nothing obscene, but enough to make me pause. I clicked on his profile, which was public. At first glance, he didn't appear to be much more than a 30-year-old marketing professional. But as I scrolled down, I spotted something unusual. He posted a photo at the same cafe I'd seen her at weeks before. On the same day, I overheard her discussing starting afresh. My gut churned as I continued scrolling. More subtle signals were a comment on one of her pictures that read, "You've got this," as well as a selfie he'd taken from what appeared to be her new residence. None of it was substantial evidence, but it was enough to raise my suspicion. I wasn't sure what to do with this information, but I knew I couldn't just sit there and wait for solutions to come my way. Her statement of a friend who helped her get through things remained with me, and I wanted to know who it was. I decided to contact one of our mutual acquaintances, Lisa. She and my wife had been friends for years, so she knew what was going on. I kept the conversation light at first, asking if she'd lately spoken with my wife or if anything seemed strange. Lisa reacted swiftly, saying she had no idea about the friend or any suggestions. I asked a few more probing questions, but she cut the conversation off defensively, claiming she couldn't help me. The entire situation felt rushed, as if she was trying to avoid becoming engaged. Not willing to give up, I called another buddy, Emily. I followed the same pattern, stating that I was simply trying to make sense of things. She was apprehensive at first, responding vaguely to my questions. When I pressed her more, she quickly ended the call, leaving me even more skeptical than before. I sat there, frustrated, trying to figure out my next move. Then, to my astonishment, Emily called back. She told me she needed to make sure what she said didn't come back to her. I assured it wouldn't, and after a long pause, she revealed what she knew. Apparently, my wife had been spending a lot of time with someone named Jake, whom she had met at work. Emily claimed she didn't know much else, but from what she'd heard, Jake was very active in the divorce advice my wife was receiving. Hearing that name felt like a puzzle piece fitting into place. It was evident that this was more than just her need for space or to find herself. Someone else was in the picture, directing her decisions, and I was eager to discover why. I chose to confront it in my own manner. That Saturday, I headed to her apartment building and parked a block away, trying to confirm what I already suspected. A few hours later, she and Jake stepped out of the building. They did not hold hands or anything, but the way they walked together, close, leaning in to talk, was plenty. They got into his car and drove away, leaving me sitting there, staring at the spot where they had been. I did not follow them. I did not need to. At that point, it was evident she hadn't simply stopped loving me. She'd been preparing to go with someone else. And now, everything made sense. The unexpected distancing, the money questions, the forceful demands, and the divorce papers. She wasn't simply abandoning me, she was leaving me with nothing. And she was accompanied by someone at all times. I went home that night, my head racing with everything I'd learned. The betrayal burned, but what hurt the most was how premeditated everything was. She was using the divorce as a stepping stone to whatever life she was creating with Jake. But she had no idea what I had planned for her. The first mediation session felt strained from the time we stepped in. Her lawyer arrived with a binder so thick that it appeared they were bringing a case against a Fortune 500 firm. He began listing her demands as if they were entirely reasonable: half the house, the money, my assets, the car, and even some gibberish about spousal support. I remained silent, seeming to listen, but I was waiting for my attorney to make his move. When it was finally our turn, he handed a stack of paperwork across the table and said, "Before we proceed, I think it's important for everyone to review these." Her lawyer took the papers and skimmed through them. His confident posture changed fast as he flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing harder with each one. "What is this?" he inquired, gazing at my lawyer. "These documents show the transfer of all major assets into a trust. Under my client's mother's documents, show the transfer of all major assets into a trust under my client's mother's name," my lawyer said calmly. "The transfers were completed several weeks before the divorce filing, and the trust is fully legal and irrevocable." The room became utterly silent. Her lawyer looked at her, confused and frustrated. "You didn't mention this," he stated flatly. She snatched the papers from his hands and flipped through them, her face flushing. "This can't be real," she said, staring at the notarized signatures and dates. Then she turned to me, her countenance changing from incredulity to rage. "You planned this?" she muttered, gazing at me as if I'd committed a heinous crime. "You knew I was going to file, and you set this up to screw me over." I did not respond. I just sat there and let her connect the dots on her own. Her lawyer, apparently agitated, requested my counsel to elaborate. So he did, slowly, deliberately, and with every piece of evidence necessary to make the transfers irrefutable. The dates aligned exactly, indicating that I had transferred everything well before she filed. The signatures were duly notarized, and the confidence was solid. There was nothing they could do to challenge it. She was furious. "You're unbelievable," she said, leaning forward in her chair. "I can't believe you'd do something like this to me." I still did not say anything. What was there to say? This was not about me doing anything to her. This was to defend myself, because she had made it apparent. She was not going quietly. The conference finished with her lawyer saying something about needing to rethink their strategy. But everyone in the room knew they had no further moves to make. When we walked out of the building, she took me aside in the hallway, her expression a mix of rage and desperation. "This isn't over," she added, her tone low. "You're going to regret this." I just looked at her and said, "I already regret trusting you. That's the only regret I have." Things escalated faster than I had anticipated following the mediation session. She went into complete meltdown mode, almost instantly. It began with the calls, endless calls. At first, she appeared calm, even remorseful, leaving voicemails that began, "I think we just need to talk," or "I know this got messy, but we can fix it." When I did not answer, the tone changed. By the second day, her messages alternated between sobbing and screaming. One voicemail would be her lamenting about making a mistake and not wanting to lose what we had created together. Then she'd launch into a furious tirade, accusing me of being stingy and cruel, blaming me for everything that was wrong in her life. I ignored it all. My lawyer told me not to engage, and I honestly did not want to. I was finished playing her games, but she was not. When the calls and texts did not work, she began telling stories. Mutual friends informed me that she had been telling people that the divorce was a hoax and that it was all part of a larger farce. A prank? I mean, who would believe that? The flaws in her story quickly became apparent. Friends began to ask questions like, "If it was a prank, why did you file actual legal paperwork?" Or, "Why hire a lawyer and make such specific demands if it wasn't serious?" When others didn't instantly accept the hoax justification, she doubled down. She said it was not a joke, but rather a test of our relationship's strength. She began casting herself as the victim, claiming that my reaction had hurt and betrayed her, that I had gone too far and broken our marriage's trust. At first, some individuals seemed to believe her stories. I'd get strange emails or comments from acquaintances like, "Wow, I didn't realize things were so rough for her." Even her brother lashed out, saying, "You should have just talked it out instead of being so drastic." It was annoying, but I knew the truth would eventually come out. And it did due to a common buddy. Let us call him Matt. Matt and I were not particularly close, but we had always been nice. A few weeks after the mediation, he messaged me unexpectedly, stating he had something I needed to see. When we met, he brought out his phone and showed me a series of text messages between her and Jake. I was confused at first. How did you even get these? I inquired, scanning through the messages. Matt revealed that he and Jake shared a mutual buddy who had heard their talks. Apparently, this common acquaintance had grown concerned about the way things were going, especially when Jake began gloating about how he was assisting her in securing her future. It didn't take long for that common buddy to figure out what securing her future really meant, trying to bleed me dry. Feeling awful about remaining silent, the buddy grabbed screenshots of the texts and sent them to Matt, believing he had a better relationship with me and could warn me. This guy's been playing both sides, Matt replied, shaking his head. He's been hyping her up to take you for everything while making her believe he'd be there for her afterward. Matt gave me the texts and said, "I thought you should know. You don't deserve this man." The texts were terrible. She wasn't just ranting to Jake about the divorce. She was actively planning her future steps with him, and he was guiding her through them. A message she left read, "Once the settlement's done, we'll have everything we need. I just need him to agree to the terms." Jake responded, "Don't back down. Make him feel guilty if you have to. He owes you. We'll start fresh once you've got the money." I sat there, staring at Matt's phone and trying to understand what I was reading. This was neither a misunderstanding or an emotional response to a failed marriage. This was a cold, deliberate manipulation. I thanked Matt and he left, but my thoughts were racing. Everything made sense now. Her abrupt isolation, her fixation with our finances, and her harsh demands throughout the divorce. It was all part of a plan, one she had been developing with Jake behind the scenes. The text soon circulated among our mutual friends. Matt shared them with a few friends, and they quickly spread. Her story suddenly ceased to be credible. People who had previously been indifferent or even supportive of her began to distance themselves. And the change was nearly immediate. People who had previously defended her or remained neutral suddenly recognized her for who she truly was. Even her closest allies started to distance themselves. By the time the divorce was finalized, she had only her personal things. Her lawyer quietly dismissed her complaint after recognizing there was no legal basis to stand on. All of those bold requests had crumbled under the weight of the documents I had produced, and the trust I had established with my mother was unbreakable. Jake seemed to vanish as soon as things began to unravel. I wouldn't be surprised if he used her as much as she did me. From what I could tell, he'd been feeding her fantasies of independence and a new beginning. But the moment it became evident she wasn't going away with anything, he was gone. Without Jake in her corner, her confidence plummeted. The calls and texts continued, but they became increasingly desperate. She was not accusing me anymore. She begged, "Can we just talk, please? I'll do anything to fix this." One voicemail stated a different opinion. "You don't have to forgive me, but can't we just settle this and move on? I'll drop everything if you just talk to me." I did not respond. I could not. It was too late to reverse the harm. Even her family began to drift away. Her brother contacted me at one time, apologizing for some of the things he had said before when he believed her side of the story. "I didn't know what she was doing to you," he said. "I'm sorry I ever took her word for it. As for me, I received the house, my savings, and something I hadn't experienced in a long time: peace of mind." My mother, as usual, was my rock. She arrived with buckets of paint and a list of suggestions to help me reclaim the area as mine. Now life feels like it's mine again. No more second-guessing every small interaction. No longer feeling betrayed. Just peace. She is a chapter from my history that I no longer read. And the remainder of the story is entirely up to me to write. My parents sued me for cutting off contact and tried to drag me back into their drama. Their manipulation led to a court battle. I got my friend's sister pregnant, but she lied about it. My parents disowned me, but now that they know the truth, they are pleading with me. Okay, so here's the thing. I need to get this off my chest, because my life became a total wreck around a year ago. Let me begin at the beginning, because, believe me, this is one of those situations where you're just like, seriously, what the hell? I never imagined that I'd be here sharing this on Reddit, but I suppose that's what happens when your family goes crazy and you're left standing there, wondering, how did this even happen? My friend Dave has a sister named Jenny. Both of them have been in my life for years. It's nothing big, is it? We all grew up in the same area and occasionally hang out. Jenny was never quite like the others. I don't mean to come across as cruel, but she was dealing with some mental health issues. To be honest, it wasn't my business. And I don't know all the specifics. Everyone knew Jenny struggled, but Dave never mentioned it much, and I didn't ask. In any case, Jenny unexpectedly called me a year ago to tell me she was pregnant. Okay, that's cool. With the exception of one little detail, she claims that I am the father. I swear my brain just short-circuited at that very instant. I thought, wait, what? Now, let me be quite clear. I have never, ever hugged Jenny, much less had an intimate relationship with her. I was therefore unable to even comprehend her making such a ridiculous claim against me. I told her straight away, Jenny, I don't know what you're talking about, but there's no way I'm the father. We've never been close like that. However, she simply repeated it repeatedly, as if I were going to magically recall a night that never occurred. To put it mildly, it was strange. Though I was secretly freaking out, I attempted to remain composed, thinking perhaps this was a result of her mental health issues or something. This is the point at which things start to go wrong. A prenatal paternity test is something Jenny declines to take. She refused to move, even though I was sitting there thinking, if you're so sure it's my kid, why wouldn't you just take the test and prove it? It was a guilt trip city, and I wasn't buying it when she said things like, you need to be there for your child, and you're abandoning us before the baby's even been born. I therefore made it plain that I would not sign anything if she chose not to take the test. I had no intention of legally binding myself to a child that wasn't mine. Easy, isn't it? That should be the end of it, I thought. I was mistaken, boy. The familial drama begins. My parents found out a few weeks later. My parents have this whole traditional values thing going on. And the moment they learn about the issue, they lose it. Like, totally lose it. I still love them though. I'm just standing there trying to speak, but they're not listening. And they're calling me names and calling me a shame and a deadbeat. They wouldn't listen to me when I informed them. Mom. Dad. This isn't my kid. Jenny's just making stuff up. They couldn't seem to get rid of the idea that I was the one who brought this baby into the world. After that, there were many ugly arguments. To be honest, I'm still upset about things that were said that I probably can't take back. Despite my repeated assurances that it wasn't my child, my parents persisted in pressuring me to act morally and become a father. They didn't care about it. They saw me as already guilty. They stated they couldn't believe I would refuse my own child and that they didn't raise me to be a deadbeat. I was not even in the same state when Jenny would have become pregnant, which makes the situation even more bizarre. Yes, she allegedly became pregnant while spending a whole month at a friend's house. My parents dismissed this when I brought it up to them. People make mistakes, they stated. Yes, this was more than a simple error. This was a serious charge that might destroy my life. At this point, Jenny is approximately 6 months along in her pregnancy. The entire family has now turned against me. Every phone contact, text message, and family meal revolves around the idea that I must mature and assume responsibility for this child. I was going crazy. I felt as though I was in a bad dream, and no matter what I did or said, no one took me seriously. Fortunately, most of my friends supported me, but even a few of them began to have doubts. For example, are you sure, man? Maybe you don't remember something. My parents finally gave me the ultimatum. They're casting me out of their lives, disowning me, and kicking me to the curb if I don't take charge and behave like a father. They were dead serious, despite my initial belief that they were bluffing. They made it clear to me that I would no longer be accepted in the family if I didn't comply. Indeed, they disowned me after I refused to give in. That hurt, let me tell you. I was angry, perplexed, and simply hurt. They decided to believe someone else over me, even though they were the ones who reared me and were meant to support me. I was thrown out by my own family as if I didn't exist. It was cruel. After the baby was born, things became even more bizarre. Playing the part of a proud grandmother, my mother was present at the hospital. It wasn't until later that I found out. I had to deal with some legal issues to get the paternity test completed because Jenny was still refusing to do it. Guess what happened when the results were in? Not my child. I had no possibility of becoming the father, and I had a simultaneous feeling of relief and rage as soon as I held the paper in my hands. Finally, they'll see the truth. They'll realize they were wrong, and everything will go back to normal. That was my thought when I sent my parents the results. Instead, they began bombarding my phone with requests for forgiveness, money offers, and apologies. In an attempt to make things better, my dad even mailed me several $100s. The problem is that I retained the money. Yes, I did accept it. After everything they had to do to me, I felt like I owed them. But pardon them? Number I made it plain that I would not expose myself to such treachery again if they were prepared to disown me for such a thing. I understand. I truly do. While the majority of my friends supported me, others, along with my therapist, began to say things like, maybe you should give them another chance. They're your parents after all. However, how can you simply forgive someone who was willing to discard you so readily? When someone believes a falsehood about their own child, how can you trust them? I'm currently caught between the belief that I did nothing wrong and the question of whether I should even make an effort to mend my family's relationship. I can't get rid of the sensation that they let me down when I needed them the most. Though, because every time I think about it, I recall how fast they betrayed me. Okay, so you would think that things would settle down after the drama involving Jenny's kid and my parents, wouldn't they? Not at all. My life had different ideas. If anything, the situation continued to get worse. You would think it would have ended with me proving I wasn't the father, but wow, I wish it had been that easy. It turns out that people would do anything to avoid accepting responsibility if they don't want to acknowledge that they made a mistake. I therefore thought, okay, now my parents will realize they were wrong, and maybe things can get back to normal. After the paternity test results showed that I wasn't the father. However, rather than providing the solace I had hoped for, things became much more problematic. To begin with, Jenny went totally crazy. She began circulating the area with tales that I had interfered with the test in some way, or had fabricated it. Yes, you read correctly. She believed that I had somehow persuaded an entire laboratory to falsify the results to support my claims. I mean, how could I possibly do that? I'm not a genius who can rig DNA testing. I'm simply an ordinary guy. Jenny, however, was not listening. She was determined to paint me as the antagonist in her tale. She went around claiming that I had deceived everyone into believing I wasn't the father and that I was leaving her in the child. It didn't matter, that it didn't make sense. People began to trust her. Rumors from small towns traveled quickly, and soon I was being seen as a scumbag by people at the grocery store. I even had people come right up to me and question why I wasn't taking charge of my child. It enraged me. Nobody appeared to care that I had the test results to show that I wasn't the father. I was being held responsible for something I had nothing to do with, while Jenny was out there acting like the victim. Never in my life have I felt so powerless. Being betrayed by your family is one thing, but what about when everyone in the community believes you are the villain? That has a distinct sound. What about my parents? They were still making an effort to be polite, but it was obvious that they were also at a loss for how to respond to the scenario. My mother kept phoning and leaving heartfelt, lengthy voicemails, expressing her desire for her family to reunite. She wanted to brush everything under the rug, as if nothing had ever happened, and didn't even discuss what had transpired. She even invited me over for dinner, as if it would suddenly undo all the harm they had caused. It was offensive, in addition to being awkward. They believed that a few family meals and some forced grins would make everything okay after what they had to do to me. Like they didn't even grasp how much trust they had broken. They just said, let's move on. There was no apology or recognition of how severely they had messed up. And that's the problem. Trust cannot be restored with a hug and a dinner once it has been shattered in that way. Rebuilding requires a lot of labor and effort, and they weren't even prepared to acknowledge their mistakes. The worst part was when my father attempted to buy me off. He simply emailed me to offer to buy me a new automobile if I returned to the family. As in what? Did they believe they could simply buy my pardon? I wasn't even sure how to react because it was so disconnected from reality. For a long time, I just gazed at the email, trying to determine whether it was a cruel joke. My dad was serious, though. I didn't answer. I was unable to. How can you respond to such a thing? Correctly repairing things was not important to them. Simply because it was convenient for them, they wanted me back in their life. And I became aware of how little they truly understood what they had done when they believed that hurling money at me would make everything better. The worst aspect, however, was discovering later that Jenny had begun contacting people I knew in an attempt to include them in her drama. She even tried to persuade Samantha, my ex-girlfriend, that I was this awful person who had left his child behind. After years of not communicating, Sam suddenly texted me, saying, "We need to talk." I didn't know what she was talking about at first, but when she revealed that Jenny had been attempting to rekindle old drama by contacting her, I nearly lost it. I told Jenny to cease over the phone. I wasn't going to allow her to include my friends and ex-partners in her mess. I was done with the lies and the games. However, she simply hung up after laughing. Talking to a wall was like that. Nothing I said would reach her, since she was so engrossed in her fantasy world. By now, I was thinking about hiring a lawyer quite seriously. Even though I didn't want to go that far, I had no other option. I felt like I had no one on my side, while Jenny was out there damaging my reputation and my parents were supporting her actions. Yes, I had the support of my closest friends, but even they were unaware of how awful things had gotten. At some point, I had to decide. I couldn't continue to wait for the next insane claim or rumor to surface, living in a condition of continual tension. I made the decision to sever all connections, not just with Jenny, but also with my parents. It wasn't simple, in fact. It was awful. However, I realized I couldn't allow them to continue to bring me down. I sent my parents a lengthy email outlining my feelings of betrayal, my failure to trust them, and my inability to trust them going forward. Nothing was sugar-coated by me. I was honest with them, telling them that I wasn't ready to forgive them and that I wasn't sure if I would ever be. I advised them to start by sincerely apologizing and accepting responsibility for their conduct if they want to have any chance of a future relationship with me. No more acting as though nothing was wrong. There's no more ignoring issues. Regarding Jenny, I blocked her on all platforms. Her machinations were becoming too much for me to handle. I wasn't going to allow her to continue entangling me in her mess, since she wasn't my concern. I even had to inform her brother Dave that I would not be able to spend some time with his family. Dave has always been a great buddy, so that was difficult, but I had to prioritize my own health. I took them off a few months ago. And to be honest, I've been relieved, even if I occasionally feel bad or question my decision. I know that ultimately I made the right choice. Even though it's difficult, there are moments when you have to leave. It's messy and convoluted, to be sure, but at least I'm not always watching for the next catastrophe to occur. At last, I'm able to breathe. But man, I never would have believed you if you had told me a year ago that this is where I would wind up. I suppose that's just the way life is. First update. Okay, so this is where it gets even stranger. I believe that the pandemonium would be resolved if I severed my relationship with Jenny and my parents. I reasoned that if I cut them out of my life, everything would settle down and I could move on. Naturally, however, things are not so simple. Terminating them? And that was only the start of a whole new problem. A few weeks after blocking Jenny and sending the email to my parents, I received an unexpected contact from Mike, an old acquaintance from high school. He suddenly asked how I was doing, even though we hadn't spoken in years. Okay, that's random, I thought at first, but then he informed me that my parents contacted him. In the past, Mike and I weren't even that close, so why would my parents get in touch with him? That was a serious warning sign. It seems that they had been attempting to persuade others to speak with me on their behalf. I'm speaking of longtime acquaintances, distant family members, and even folks I don't really know. They were telling everyone that they were concerned about me and that I was in a horrible position. They seemed to be attempting to paint me as the unstable one. What's the worst? They were presenting the entire situation as though I should have apologized for interrupting them. Mike didn't mind. He wanted to alert me because he knew something was wrong, but it went beyond that. I began receiving messages from a wide range of people over the course of the following few days, including some I had just met a few times, and others I hadn't spoken to in years. It was crazy. Everything they were saying was the same. Your parents are really worried about you, or you should give them another chance. Somehow, they had persuaded everyone that I was the villain in this scenario, that I had lost my mind, and had to make amends. It was unbelievable to me. My parents were out here waging a full-fledged public relations campaign to paint me as the villain, while I was simply trying to move on with my life. I had the impression that I was in a strange parallel dimension where nothing made sense. I tried to avoid the drama as much as possible, but it kept coming back to me. When they contacted my employer, it was the last straw. You heard correctly. My parents gave my workplace a call. I'm not even sure how they obtained the number, but they managed to locate my boss's phone number and called the office to inform him that I wasn't feeling well. How embarrassing must that have been? One day, with a serious expression on his face, my employer took me into his office and asked me how things were at home. I was taken aback. At first, I wasn't even sure what to say. When your boss asks if your parents believe you've lost your mind, what do you say? Fortunately, he was really understanding when I told him the whole issue. Even if he expressed regret for bringing it up, the damage had already been done, guy. My own parents were now attempting to interfere with my work. They seemed intent on ruining everything for me simply because I refused to comply with their demands. Then there was nothing I could do. To obtain a restraining order against them, I went to a lawyer and began the process. Even though I didn't want to go that far, I had no other option. They were interfering with my friends, my career, and my mental health. Even if it meant officially cutting them off, I had to defend myself. The procedure was drawn out and tense. Along with the paperwork and court dates, there was a great deal of tension. However, I also experienced a strange sense of relaxation. I felt like I was finally taking charge of the matter. I will no longer allow them to take over every aspect of my life. No more allowing them to control the story. Naturally, chaos ensued when they learned about the restraining order. In a lengthy, guilt-ridden email, my mother told me how she never thought her own son would act in this way and that family should always remain united. She said that I was the source of all the suffering and that I was destroying the family. I didn't bite, but it was textbook manipulation. I didn't answer. It grew worse before it got better. Though I wish I could say that was the end of it. One day, my car was vandalized when I got home from work. The word liar had been keyed into its side by someone. I didn't have any evidence that it was my parents, but really, who else could it be? Other than a few close friends. I hadn't disclosed the restraining order to anyone. The only people with an incentive to do such a thing were my parents. They had to strike out in any way they could, since it seemed like they couldn't lose control. I reported it to the police, but it was never resolved. Another reminder that sometimes the ones who should love you the most can become your worst adversaries, even if you attempt to do things the right way. In order to be safe, I then began parking my car at a friend's house. I have to stop taking chances. In case they tried something similar, I even put security cameras around my apartment. I had the impression that I was constantly on edge, waiting for anything to happen. But after a while, things began to settle down. After the restraining order was granted, my parents were prohibited from getting in touch with me or visiting my house or place of employment. My shoulders were greatly relieved. I was able to breathe for the first time in what seemed like an eternity. Even after several months, I'm still getting my bearings. I had to explain the entire scenario to my friends and coworkers and make sure they understood the truth, which required a lot of damage control. While some were doubtful, the majority were supportive. Do you honestly think your folks would go that far? I understand. It's difficult to accept. You understand, however, how far some individuals will go when they feel like they're losing control since you've been there yourself. In retrospect, I never thought things would become this terrible. It's amazing how easily a family may turn against you if you don't follow their rules. All of this has taught me one vital lesson, though. You cannot allow anyone, not even your family, to dictate how you live your life. even if it hurts. There are times when you have to make the difficult decision to leave. I have no idea what the future holds for my parents and me. Perhaps they will come to their senses and truly apologize. Perhaps not. In any case, I'm done allowing them to rule my life. I'm not looking back. I have my own road to follow. Second update. Okay. So this is when things start to change. I assumed things would finally calm down when I obtained the restraining order and began attempting to start over. Unexpectedly, however, life had other ideas. My folks found a new method to play tricks on me just when I was starting to feel like I could breathe again. It wasn't direct contact this time. It wasn't sending emails or damaging my car. No, this was messed up on a completely different level. I'm sitting at home one day, taking care of nothing, when I receive a letter in the mail. That's not too strange, is it? This letter, however, came from a lawyer. I initially assumed it had to do with the restraining order, possibly some last-minute paperwork or something. However, no. A lawsuit was filed. For what, you ask? My own parents were suing me, suffering on an emotional level. I was reading something that I couldn't even believe. They were actually suing me for interrupting them, claiming they were entitled to compensation since my actions had seriously damaged their mental well-being. They went so far as to say that I had cut them off from the rest of the family, which was absurd because it was they who isolated me, not the other way around. For a good 5 minutes, I just sat there and stared at the letter, trying to take in the situation. Who, after all, does that? Because they are upset over being cut off. Who sues their own child? I was at a loss for what to do. There was a part of me that was extremely worried out, and another part of me wanted to chuckle at how absurd it all was. This was legal now, and it was going to get really unpleasant. It was no longer just a family drama. I immediately called my attorney. This was too much for me to do alone. I was as surprised as she was. She had witnessed many unpleasant family issues, but bringing a lawsuit against your own child for emotional distress, even for her, that was novel. We discussed the lawsuit specifics, and even though most of it was obviously false, I felt we couldn't ignore it. Since they were sincere, I had to defend myself. The weeks that followed were filled with stress, phone calls, and meetings. The findings of the paternity test, the restraining order, and the harassment I had been experiencing were all pieces of proof I needed to collect. It felt unreal that it had come to this, even though my lawyer was sure we could win. When I refused to allow my parents to dominate me anymore, they tried to drag me through the mud in court. The problem is that they went beyond the case. Unfortunately, they had to go farther. In an attempt to turn other family members against me, they began contacting them. I began receiving messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, including aunts, uncles, and cousins. Why can't you just make peace with your parents? Was what they were all saying. You're acting self-centered. They seem to have been indoctrinated to believe that I was the bad guy in this whole situation. I was incensed about the entire scenario, not just my parents. It seemed like they always managed to change the story and paint me as the villain, regardless of what I did or how hard I tried to defend myself. Because you set limits, your parents are suing you for emotional distress. How can you convey that to someone who is only hearing one side of the story? I eventually had to cut off even more individuals because of it. I unfriended people on social media, blocked family members, and generally cut off any ties to that aspect of my life. I couldn't keep defending myself to people who had already made up their minds. Not because I didn't care about them, I did. It was tiring, and I had had enough of defending my choices to those who refused to consider the wider picture. The court date eventually arrived. I arrived with my attorney, ready for whatever bullshit they would hurl at me. And it was a circus, I tell you. My parents had a full sob story prepared about how they had always supported me, how they had attempted to help me get through difficult times, and how I had rudely interrupted them without cause. Since they were the ones who initially disowned me, it was quite amazing how they portrayed themselves as the victims in all of this. But it didn't sit well with my lawyer. She dissected their claims in detail, presenting the judge with all of the proof of their harassment, including the paternity test and the restraining order. By the end of it, you could tell the court wasn't buying their story, and it was awful. The judge gave me a favorable ruling. In the end, it was a minor success, because the lawsuit was obviously dismissed, and my parents were compelled to pay my legal bills. It didn't feel like a victory, though. Even though I did win, there was still a lot of aftermath to cope with, and it seemed like I had just left a nightmare. My parents made a last-ditch attempt to reintegrate into my life following the case. They wrote me this lengthy, heartfelt letter in which they expressed their regret for everything, their desire to put things right, and their inability to stand the thought of losing me. To be honest, I didn't even answer, and it was the same old guilt-tripping rubbish they had been doing from the beginning. I had already decided that I would not return. A person can only endure so much until they are forced to leave permanently. Indeed, it was painful. No matter how terrible things become, it's not simple to cut off your family. However, there are situations when it's essential for your own mental health. No matter how much they pretended to love me, I couldn't allow them to continue entangling me in their mess. I refuse to let their poisonous form of love to continue to contaminate my life. That's where I am at the moment. I'm moving on. The restraining order is still in effect, and the case is behind me. Although it hasn't been simple, I'm learning to live without the commotion and the never-ending worry about when the next catastrophe will strike. It feels pretty damn wonderful to feel like I have some control over my life. For the first time in a long time, I have no idea what the future will bring. Perhaps things will change in the future. They might not. But for now, I'm concentrating on taking care of myself and repairing the aspects of my life that they attempted to destroy. Though it has taken a while, I am beginning to glimpse the end of the tunnel. Third update. Okay. So if you've been following along, you would think that the restraining order and the legal issue would put an end to the chaos. However, no. My family managed to give me a final surprise. To be honest, this one made me shake my head, since I didn't believe they could go any lower. However, here we are. The situation had finally begun to settle down a few months, following the court's decision in my favor. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, I was able to concentrate on starting again, after severing my connections with everyone who was stressing me out. No letters from lawyers, no sporadic communications from old friends, just quiet. At least that's what I believed. I ran into my cousin Melissa one day, while out on errands, doing routine tasks like grocery shopping. Now, throughout all of this drama, Melissa and I hadn't spoken much. Although we were never particularly close as children, we always got along. I decided to say hello to her when I spotted her. We ended up talking for a while, and initially, it was just your typical conversation, catching up on work, life, and other things. She suddenly interrupts me though, saying, "Hey, did you hear what your parents are planning?" I went cold. "Are you planning?" I asked, experiencing that old pit in my gut all of a sudden. Melissa sighed and continued, although she appeared a little uneasy, as if she wasn't sure if she should even tell me. "Yes, next month, there will be a large family reunion. It seems that they have been telling everyone that they hope you and them will be able to reconcile." It was unbelievable to me. They were actually preparing an ambush reunion in an attempt to reintegrate me into the family. They were inviting everyone, including distant relatives, family friends, and individuals I hadn't seen in years, Melissa revealed, when I asked for more information. What's the kicker? They had been pretending that I was aware of the entire situation and informing everyone that I would be present. I was enraged. They had made me out to be the villain if I didn't turn up, even though I hadn't agreed to anything. My parents' standard tactic was to control the issue, paint me as the bad guy, and attempt to guilt-trip me into complying with their wishes. I told Melissa up front that I wasn't going, and I thanked her for informing me. Even she appeared somewhat conflicted, as if she were falling for my parents. "We just want to fix things." Line of reasoning. She wanted me to go and put things right, and I could see it in her expression. However, I was not going to fall into that trap after everything they had done. That evening, I went home and gave it a lot of thought. I felt compelled to say something, even though I knew I wouldn't be attending the reunion. Since I couldn't ignore this, I made the decision to send my parents a final email, outlining everything in detail. I sat down and sent them an email the following morning. It was brief but straightforward. I informed them that I was aware of the reunion and that I would not be attending. I made it plain that I didn't want to participate in any coerced reconciliation. Certainly not in front of a large group of people. I advised them to respect my limits first, if they were sincere about making things right. And there was nothing else to discuss until they were able to accomplish it. To be honest, I didn't need a response and didn't anticipate one. This was the last time I needed to correct the record. Naturally though, my parents were unable to ignore it. My dad phoned me a few days later. He left a lengthy, meandering voicemail about how I was destroying the family and how this reunion was meant to be a new beginning for everyone. But I didn't answer. He even said, "Your grandparents would be so disappointed in how you're handling this," in an attempt to put me under guilt. That voicemail really got to me. It made me think of all the times my parents had manipulated me and used guilt to get what they wanted. Not because I believed it. They would use any tactic they could to make me feel like the issue, even if it meant bringing up my grandparents, who, incidentally, had always been there for me. They were unable to acknowledge that perhaps, just possibly, they were the ones who needed to examine themselves closely. I left the voicemail unanswered. What was the purpose? I was not going to allow them to drag me back into their drama after I had finished speaking. However, it continued to bother me for days after that. I thought I was simply refusing to make peace, and I kept thinking about the reunion and all the family who would be present. I questioned how many of them were receiving the distorted version my parents were giving them, and how many of them truly understood the whole story. In the aftermath of the reunion, I never heard from my parents again. On Facebook, I came across pictures of joyful grins, family embraces, and other such scenes. My parents were grinning and behaving as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just spent the last year attempting to ruin my life. Seeing them act as though everything was flawless was strange. However, I suppose they were always skilled at acting. Melissa informed me the reunion had been unpleasant when I saw her again a few weeks later. It seems that many people were expecting me to arrive, and some awkward talks ensued when I didn't. According to Melissa, my parents' attempts to explain my absence were not well received. Some family members even began to wonder why I wasn't present, and why my parents hadn't been more forthright about the whole thing. After all, I suppose not everyone believed their story, and I suppose that's the current situation. Even though I've been able to put the drama behind me, I know it's always there, just beneath the surface. I've come to terms with the fact that my parents are unlikely to acknowledge their mistakes. I can't alter them, but I can safeguard myself, continue to live my life independently of them, and concentrate on the individuals who genuinely care about me. It has been a long journey, and I will admit that there are still moments when it hurts. It's difficult to cut off relatives, and sometimes I question whether I made the right decision. But I knew in my heart that I had to. They kept attempting to pull me into a toxic loop, but I had to choose me, my future, and my mental health. That concludes this crazy journey. Things may or may not change in the future. In any case, I'm tired of allowing my family to dictate how I live. Now that I have my own road to follow, I'm doing it on my own terms for the first time in a long time. My family hijacked my vacation plans for my golden sister and her kids. But this time, I had my own secret escape plan. Reddit, I need some perspective on this. I need advice with my family predicament, which has been accumulating for decades. But it's a long one. Despite growing up in a seemingly typical suburban Massachusetts family, I 35 degrees Fahrenheit have always struggled with this particular dynamic. The golden child has always been my older sister, Kate, 42F. Our home has been a monument to Kate's life since I can remember, with every wall adorned with her accomplishments and every discussion focused on her life. My parents were too busy getting ready for Kate's college interviews to buy a cake for my 10th birthday, which I can still clearly recall. They even attempted to pass off Kate's leftover graduation cake, which still had her name on it, as my birthday cake. As I grew up, Kate's accomplishments eclipsed every significant event in my life. Kate had recently been selected to the debate team, so my parents were hardly aware that I had made the honor roll in middle school. Kate had to tour a college campus, so they were unable to attend the ceremony when I won a local painting competition in high school. Knowing that expressing my accomplishments would only elicit a brief, "That's nice, dear." Before the topic of Kate was brought up again, I learned to celebrate them in private, in my room. Even our possessions revealed the priorities of our family. The newest technology, stylish clothing, and everything Kate needed for her many extracurricular activities were always in her room. In contrast, my room was filled with hand-me-downs. When I expressed interest in taking music lessons, I had to make do with Kate's abandoned violin, her old clothes, and her old school supplies. I had trouble playing the violin since it was too large for me. We already spent so much on Kate's piano lessons this year. My mother responded in response to my request for a suitably sized one. All the way through high school, the trend persisted. I was forced to use borrowed library books to study, while Kate received private instruction for her settees. My parents took out a loan for her to buy a car for college. They advised me to take the bus when I needed assistance getting about. Kate's needs and desires were at the center of every financial choice, family discussion, and holiday preparation. It was really difficult in college. With the full backing of our parents, Kate had earned her degree from a renowned university. They could only agree to pay half of the tuition at a public school when it was my turn. They clarified, "We're still paying off Kate's student loans. You'll need to figure out the rest on your own." In order to make ends meet, I worked 2 part-time jobs while I was a student, frequently dozing off over my textbooks. Kate, in the meantime, was beginning her career at a position our parents had helped her land through their contacts. 7 years ago, Kate got married, and everything changed, or rather, grew worse. For a whole year, our family's whole attention was on the wedding. For her ideal wedding, which included a designer gown, an opulent location, and a guest list of more than 300, my parents took out another loan. Despite their concerns about the payments, I recall hearing them in the kitchen one evening, and their insistence that nothing was too good for Kate's special day. Was there ever any question that she was her maid of honor? I was supposed to coordinate bridal showers, plan a lavish bachelorette party, and manage any minor emergencies that arose. My mother told me, "Don't be selfish, Elizabeth. This is your sister's special time." When I expressed how stressed I was with juggling these obligations while working a full-time job, the twins followed. Our parents were ecstatic. when Kate revealed she was expecting twins. Even though they were still repaying the wedding loan, they contributed to the down payment on a home close to them. I witnessed them spend their retirement money, which they claimed they couldn't access when I needed assistance with college, on the day they signed those documents. However, they claimed that this was different. This is for our grandchildren. Who was the default babysitter, you ask? Yes, I do. It started out as sporadic babysitting. The request, Elizabeth, could you watch the boys for a few hours, became a weekly ritual, which was later extended to evenings whenever they had appointments. My parents were in favor of this arrangement, stating, this is what family does. Kate and her husband Jack, 43 million, assumed that I would always be there to assist them whenever I attempted to object. Even while I adore them, the twins, who are now active 7-year-olds, are draining. The routine is the same every weekend. Kate unexpectedly drops them off at my place, usually with a pretext that she needs me time, or has essential errands to run. The lads run amok, transforming my tiny apartment into a catastrophe. Kate starts crying about how overwhelmed she is when I try to set limits or ask for advance warning, and my parents criticize me for not being supportive. I put in a lot of overtime to establish myself in the marketing industry. I recently received a promotion offer that would involve greater hours and more travel. My mother remarked, but what about the twins? Your sister needs you here. Who will help me with the boys? When I brought up this topic during a family dinner in the hopes of receiving some congratulations, it seems as though my time, profession, and life are completely irrelevant. My father adds, family should come first, Elizabeth. My mother always responds, your sister has 2 children to look after. You don't know what tired really means. When I tried to explain how overwhelming it all is, Kate accused me of being envious of her life and her kids. She replied, you're just bitter because you're still single, as though my marital status were the only factor that determines my value as a person. After a particularly demanding weekend with the twins, I made the decision to finally treat myself to a beach vacation last month. They had successfully damaged my laptop and left permanent markings on my couch. I knew I needed a vacation. I discovered a small, unpretentious resort in Florida that was ideal for a tranquil retreat. My mother's eyes glowed when I brought it up during our weekly family supper. Oh, that's perfect. We should all go together. The twins would love the beach. Before I could protest, Kate had already begun organizing events. She stated, you can take the boys swimming while Jack and I have some alone time, as though my trip would naturally turn into a time for them to be looked after. In exchange for my assistance with the twins, of course. My parents even offered to upgrade my reservation to a superior resort where they would all stay. Totally disregarding the fact that this was meant to be my vacation, they began organizing activities and outings centered around what the twins would like. I made a choice that would alter everything while I was lying in bed that night. I reserved a separate resort on a quiet little island. I kept the change in plans a secret from everyone. Silently, I began preparing by scheduling time off work, packing my things covertly, and ensuring that my emergency fund was available. Even though I know it's dishonest, I simply couldn't stand it any longer. At the airport, they will be separated from us. While I board my flight to another location, they will be traveling to Florida. I've disabled location sharing and am ready for the inevitable criticism. Yes, I am aware that there will be drama. Yes, I am aware that they will be upset. But I want to prioritize myself for the first time in my life. I've been the dependable sister, the ideal daughter, and the always available aunt for 35 years. To meet my family's expectations, I've given up my social life, my weekends, and my own needs. I was constantly babysitting, so I missed out on dating prospects. I have declined advancements that might conflict with the needs of my family. To be there for them whenever they need me, I've put my personal life on hold. Right now, I'm fleeing a lifetime of being taken advantage of, not just a holiday. I intend to utilize this as a turning point to set clear limits with my family, and perhaps even take a complete vacation from them. I'm sick of always making sacrifices, being the family's pillar of support, and being the dependable fallback option. Reddit, what should I do? Am I exaggerating? Is it appropriate for me to want something else for myself? Or should I merely follow their plans and accept my place in the family? First update. I appreciate all of your help and guidance. Since my last post, a lot has transpired, and I want to explain how it all turned out. Although everything went according to plan, the day at the airport was more emotionally fraught than I had anticipated. I purposefully chose a different check-in station that was far from where my family would be when I arrived early. I watched everyone come through the glass walls of the terminal, Jack checking their booking details, my parents looking excited, Kate handling the twins, and Kate hauling baggage. I silently went through security for my own flight as soon as they started to head to their check-in counter. As soon as they realized I wasn't at their gate, my phone began to buzz. The bewildered text first appeared. Where are you? Gate B12 is where we are. Then the anxious ones. How are you, Elizabeth? Has something taken place? And lastly, the irate ones. How could you treat us like this? The guys are in tears. Before I boarded my aircraft, I switched off my phone. I experienced a peculiar fusion of liberation and remorse for the first time in years. I had lived with that guilt for the majority of my life. However, freedom? It was exhilarating, and it was new. The crowded tourist destination they were going to was nothing like the little island where my resort was located. Years of strain vanished the instant I set foot on the beach. No twins to babysit, no family problems to handle, no schedule to adhere to. The ocean, me, and complete freedom. In fact, the first 2 days were challenging. The twins would be eating lunch now, or Kate would typically require assistance going to bed at this hour. So I kept checking the time. It's difficult to break decades of indoctrination. However, something changed on the third day. I experimented with things I had always wanted to do, but had never had time for. I loved every minute of my silly yet fun surfing lesson. I became friends with a bunch of lone travelers when I enrolled in a yoga class by the beach. I even had a spontaneous dinner date with a fascinating man I met at the resort's coffee shop one evening. Even though it was only a casual supper, it served as a reminder that I could live a life apart from my family. When I eventually turned my phone back on after 5 days, that was the true test. There were dozens of voicemails, more than 300 text messages, and 147 missed calls. Even my mother had called my place of employment to report a family emergency. Fortunately, I had previously told my supervisor that I would be taking a holiday. Some of the voicemails were played for me. My mother's tone changed from one of concern to one of rage to one of manipulation. Elizabeth, how could you leave your family in such a way? The twins are inconsolable. Did we raise you this way? Even worse were Kate's messages. You've ruined everything. The lads are persistent in their request for Aunt Lizzie. I can't handle meetings by myself, so Jack had to shorten them. However, one message struck a different chord. My father sent it, and he seemed unsure for once. Elizabeth, please let us know you're safe, even though I don't understand what's happening. I had never heard him talk to me without instantly defending Kate or pressuring me to do more before. I texted our family group chat just once. I'm having a great vacation and I'm safe. When I get back, I'll get in touch with you. Please give me space. I then turned off the conversation and resumed talking to myself. The following 5 days were life-changing. In addition to reading bedtime stories to the twins, I also read 3 novels. I spoke with other guests without interruption. Every evening, instead of rushing home to assist with baths and sleep, I watched the sunset. In order to digest years' worth of suppressed emotions, I even began journaling. I ate dinner at a little beachside eatery last night. When the elder waitress saw that I was alone, she inquired as to whether I was content with my seclusion. She said something that stuck with me after I gave her a brief explanation of my circumstances. Family is vital, honey, but not at the expense of your own well-being. Putting yourself first is sometimes the boldest thing you can do. I didn't head straight to my flat when I got home. In order to give myself time to get ready for the inevitable confrontation, I had reserved a hotel room for 2 nights. During this period, I updated my work emergency contacts, changed the locks on my doors, and above all, put my boundaries in writing. I accidentally liked a coworker's post on social media which is how my family found out I was back. My mother and Kate arrived at my apartment building in a matter of hours, constantly buzzing my intercom. Across the street, I watched them from the window of my hotel room, feeling oddly cut off from their spectacular performance. I'm going to confront them tomorrow at a neutral coffee shop, not my residence. I know it won't be simple, but I've prepared what I want to say. When I consider it, my hands tremble. But I'm choosing myself for the first time in my life, and I know I'm doing the right thing in spite of the worry, the guilt, and the drama that will undoubtedly ensue. I'll provide another update following my talk with my family. I'm grateful because Reddit gave me the confidence to take this first step toward independence. Second update. As scheduled, my family and I gathered at the coffee shop, and it was even more heated than I had anticipated. This is what took place. The encounter at the coffee shop began politely enough. I got there early and sat at a corner table, where I could see the front door and the emergency exit. A habit I'd formed from years of expecting family drama. I could hardly grasp my coffee cup because my hands were shaking so much. My parents, Kate, and, surprisingly, Jack all showed up together. I am glad there are no twins. I raised my hand and said what I had practiced before they began their planned speeches. I'm establishing boundaries, and they can't be negotiated. The 2 hours that followed were a master class in manipulating emotions. Kate started crying as she described how my absence had traumatized the twins. My mom attempted to instill guilt, following all that we have done for you. Unexpectedly, Jack tried to mediate by offering a compromise in which I would only see the kids every other weekend. For the most part, my dad sat quietly and uneasy. Kate's statement, "You're being selfish. Family means sacrifice," was the pivotal moment. Something broke inside of me. Clearly but calmly, I responded, "Yes, family means sacrifice, but it's supposed to go both ways. When was the last time any of you sacrificed anything for me?" The ensuing hush was deafening. I revealed everything for the first time. The years of being Kate's second best friend, the unfair financial treatment, and the ongoing belief that my life and time were not as valuable as theirs. I then showed them my calendar for the previous year, with every weekend designated for babysitting and every holiday tailored to their requirements. Attempting to interrupt, my mother said, "But that's what aunts do." I responded by saying something I had never before dared to say. "No, that's what paid babysitters do. And, Kate, if you need this much help, maybe it's time to consider hiring one." From there, the discussion took a different turn. My mother followed Kate as she rushed out. Remarkably sorry. Jack remained and acknowledged that they had exploited my availability. After remaining silent for a while, my father said, "We never meant to make you feel this way." It was something, but it wasn't an apology. I carried out my strategy when they departed. I relocated to a different area of the city and got a new apartment. Although it's smaller than my previous residence, it's in a safe building with a doorman who has been informed of my predicament. Only my workplace and a select group of close pals now have my updated phone number. Rebuilding my life from scratch was the most difficult aspect, not the relocation or the planning. I had no true hobbies and few close acquaintances because I had spent years being there for my family. I began modestly. I enrolled in pottery lessons, joined a local reading club, and accepted dinner invitations from coworkers that I had previously consistently declined. It was a weird first weekend of real freedom. I did things that were previously unthinkable, including staying up late, going to a farmer's market, and spending hours perusing a bookshop. Kate didn't text me urgently. Mom doesn't make guilt-tripping calls. No requests for last-minute babysitting. My family's response to my relocation was harsh but expected. When my mother attempted to contact me via the company switchboard, they learned that my new job does not allow personal calls during business hours. On one occasion, Kate even visited my office, but security was alerted beforehand. She wrote a tearful letter accusing me of destroying our family. Jack was the source of the unexpected development. He apologized by email for his part in making the scenario possible. At first, Kate objected to him taking the twins to events on the weekends, but she has since come to terms with it. It's a minor yet important modification. My folks are having a hard time adjusting. Dad occasionally texts, usually in an embarrassing attempt to strike up a conversation. Mom fluctuates between angry outbursts and icy quiet. She left a voicemail last week, stating, "When you're done with this rebellion, we'll welcome you back." This isn't a phase, and she doesn't get it. My new reality is this. Without regular family interruptions, work has significantly improved. I'm more productive and focused. After noticing the shift, my supervisor assigned me to oversee a significant new project. For the first time in years, I'm also dating casually, but I'm taking it slow. Internally, there has been the biggest shift. I no longer have the ongoing background anxiety that I had for years. I've started exercising frequently, improved my diet, and slept better. According to my therapist, yes, I have finally begun therapy. I am beginning to recuperate from what she refers to as chronic family stress syndrome. The twins sent me a gift last weekend that included handcrafted notes expressing how much they miss me. Even though it was bittersweet, I remained resolute. I carefully wrote them back to let them know that, although I love them, I need some time to look after myself. I had to write it, even though Kate is unlikely to read it to them. "There's a lightness about you now. You look years younger," observed an old acquaintance of mine when I ran into her yesterday. She is correct. I feel lighter in spite of the angry texts, the efforts at emotional manipulation, and the guilt that still surfaced. More liberated. Family love shouldn't feel like a prison sentence, I'm discovering. Respect for personal space, acknowledgement of one's own needs, and reciprocal assistance, rather than only one-sided sacrifice, are all components of true love. My new flat will be 1 month old next week. This is the first time I've ever dared to throw a tiny housewarming celebration. Only a few buddies from pottery class, book club, and work. No expectations, no drama, no family, just individuals who embrace me for who I am. I'll provide another update soon. I'm grateful to Reddit for giving me the confidence to make a life shift. Update 3. Completed update. It has been a life-changing 3 months, and I want to describe how it has all come together. The confrontation I had been dreading and anticipating arrived last week. My father unexpectedly came up to my place of employment. His method was distinct from Kate's emotional manipulations or my mother's prior frenzied attempts. When he asked if we could have lunch together, he was composed, even resigned. We got together at a peaceful eatery close to my workplace. For the first time in my life, he truly saw me as his daughter, not as Kate's sister or the family's fallback option. He remarked, "You look healthy," in a startled tone. Happier. The fact that he hadn't seen my discontent for years weighed heavily on the observation that lingered between us. The family had presented him with a proposal. They were prepared to make concessions. If I agreed to take back my place in the family, I could have every other weekend off. He went on to say, they'd even pay for my time with the twins. As though making money off of the commitment would make it more alluring. They still didn't understand, I realized as I looked at him across the table. They did not view my independence as a basic right, but rather as a negotiating chip. "Dad," I replied, "I'm not negotiating my freedom. I'm living it." The conversation that ensued was the most candid one I have ever had with my father. I described how their incessant focus on Kate had impacted me emotionally as much as practically. I told him about memories he had forgotten or had never noticed, dreams disregarded, accomplishments overlooked, and birthdays neglected. His reaction was surprising. He sat for a long time in quiet, not making the normal defense of their decisions. At last he stated, "We thought we were doing what was best for the family. We never saw how much we were hurting you." Although that wasn't quite an apology, it was the first time I had ever been acknowledged. When he inquired about my new life, that was the true turning point. He paid attention for the first time as I discussed my pottery lessons, my job advancement, and the new acquaintances I had made. Even though it was not flawless, I showed him pictures of a vase I had built. I was shocked by what he said next. "You seem to have built a good life for yourself without us." Both the recognition and the grief in his voice were genuine. We agreed at the end of lunch that nothing would ever be the same again. He gave me my first sincere embrace in years as he bid farewell. I hope someday we can be part of your life again, but on different terms. That exchange appeared to set off a final round of family strife. After learning of our lunch, my mother began a fresh round of emotional attacks. She has been informing family members that I need an intervention because I'm having a breakdown. Kate has been making passive-aggressive remarks about selfish sisters and broken families on social media because she feels deceived by our father's approval of my decisions. The difference is that none of it has the same impact on me as it formerly did. I've gained a viewpoint from my new life that I didn't have previously. Their actions, in my opinion, are an attempt to keep control over someone who has finally gained their freedom. My new flat seems like home now. My attempts at pottery and pictures of my chosen family, friends who value my independence and respect boundaries, adorn the walls. I've begun teaching my less experienced coworkers at work, ending the vicious loop of toxic support that has long ensnared me. My connection with time has changed the most. I get to spend the weekends any way I want. I've started learning Spanish, joined a local hiking group, and even started dating someone who respects and values my limits. I'm creating a life for the first time that is true to who I am, rather than what my family demands of me. The twins sent me a homemade card last Sunday, which was obviously written under supervision. It was filled with regrettable statements about how much they miss their aunt. This would have previously led me into a downward spiral of uncertainty and remorse. Rather, I responded with a tender yet strong letter, stating that although I may not be as involved in their everyday life, my love for them hasn't changed, and that sometimes grown-ups need to look for themselves. According to my therapist, I am exhibiting what she refers to as post-traumatic growth, not merely moving past the past, but creating something more robust and wholesome in its stead. She has assisted me in realizing that I am not responsible for resolving the dysfunction in my family. Yesterday was the most recent development. Jack, Kate's husband, contacted me to let me know that my stance has caused changes in their home, not to place blame on me. They've finally recruited part-time help to help with the twins, and he's become a more involved parent. Jack believes it's better for everyone, but Kate is having trouble adjusting. I'm sitting in my home office getting ready for a business trip next week as I write this last update, something I could never have done in my previous life. A frame quotation that speaks to my path is on the wall behind my desk. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is set yourself free. I want to express my gratitude to everyone who supported me and followed my tale. You gave me the confidence to make my own decisions. If you're wondering if people in comparable circumstances are selfish for desiring their own lives, know that you're not. Being free is not selfish. Treating oneself is not unkind. Setting limits is not a sign of treachery. I have no idea how my relationship with my family may develop in the future. Perhaps one day we'll discover a different kind of connection, one based on respect for one another rather than duty. In the interim, I'm concentrating on fostering the life I've built, including my friendships, interests, profession, and, above all, my sense of self. This is not merely a conclusion. It's just the beginning, and I'm looking forward to what comes next for the first time in my life. Cousin called me at midnight to babysit her grown kids. I said no. Chaos followed, and now I have a restraining order. Even though I hardly knew her or her adult children, I declined my cousin's midnight call, asking me to watch them. I have my own life, work full-time, and am 28. Being 28, naturally, that is irrelevant because it seems that I should always schedule time for my family. I know maybe 7% of them by name and 15% of them by face, but let's overlook that. I'm sorry, but someone is sure to get bogged down in the details, with the 400 Mildreds, 250 Lindas, and 800 Stephanies, Chelseas, and Janets. The first C, once every full planetary alignment. Naturally, when my parents, grandma, and siblings are all free, I make time for them. Being the youngest of 3, I work at the most forgiving job, even though it's not that bad. I also schedule time for other people I see on a regular basis. Well, let's get back to the funeral. Throughout the pre-ceremonial event, I kept getting the question, "Do you remember me?" And Are you aware of my identity? To prevent any discomfort. I responded, yes, yes, and yes. It's been a long time. One of my cousins, of whom I have no recollection, but who evidently speaks to my mom on a daily basis, approached me during that time and introduced me to her children. We said hello to each other. According to their mother, they had been eagerly awaiting my arrival and appeared ecstatic to meet me. What the expletive was the first thing that came to me, but I ignored it because I wasn't in the right frame of mind. My cousin informed me that her children were in my state, around 40 minutes away from my home, and that they were roughly my age. I thought, oh, that's awesome. But I didn't give a damn. She said she would discuss it with my mother and proposed a little gathering later this year. Yes, all right. I took it as a cool. I don't have to worry about it, and went on, even though I'm not 14 anymore, and don't need permission to do anything. Let's travel ahead to roughly 45 minutes. I receive around midnight from a number located in the city where the majority of my family resides. Furthermore, the location is quite specific, too specific to be spam. I panicked, of course. My late grandfather was only a few years older than my grandma, who was down there at the time. Call me suspicious. I picked up the phone. Hi, name. It's your relative. How are you? My thoughts are, who the expletive? However, I answered, hey, what's up? Is everything all right? Yes, she responded, as if perplexed by my inquiry. Everything is all right. Just checking in to see when you're free to get lunch this weekend, with her children's names. I felt like that meme with all the mathematics going about after I eventually figured out who this was. This woman couldn't have contacted me at almost midnight to arrange her expletive playdate. I'm sorry. What? I said. Remember at the funeral? She said. We discussed getting together later with you and kids' names. In addition to son's name, applying to university. Daughter's name is transferring there for her junior year. I was thinking that we could meet after their Saturday morning tour, and you could take them out to lunch. Alcohol is just nowhere. Son's name is just 18. Hold on. What? She claimed they were about my age, but her son is incapable of drinking, as I clearly recall. She then begins to babble about how her daughter, who is 22 years old and doesn't know what moderation means, isn't permitted to drink unless she or her husband are around. What on earth would a 28, almost 29-year-old have to discuss with an 18 and 22-year-old? Perhaps I'm the only one who thinks this. Don't use drugs, concentrate on your studies, and don't get anyone pregnant. What's the topic of discussion? In addition, I don't even know these individuals. I was gasping and squawking on the phone before I even realized it. It was not appreciated by my cousin. I muttered, yeah, I don't think so, but I was too busy laughing to hear what she was saying. I don't get off until around 8 p.m. on Saturdays, since I work a double shift. Well, first of all, I don't know what's so funny about what I said, she shot back. Additionally, you may simply have a wonderful supper or do something else. 8 p.m. It's not that late. I had lost all patience by now. Ma'am, this isn't Star Trek, and I work about 40 minutes away. After an 11-hour shift, I'm not in the mood to babysit, and I won't be arriving home until about 09:00. Although this is a college town, I can suggest a few places for you guys to check out on your own. There aren't many locations that don't serve alcohol. They do have other drinks, after all. She said, pardon me. I am aware that your mother did not teach you to treat others rudely, especially your relatives. I don't know you, dude. You're calling me at the most inconvenient time to arrange a get-together with your children, who are not my age, and I have no idea who you are. You're all young adults, girl. I cover the cost of my own health insurance. We are not alike. Do not call me again, please. After hanging up, I had a brief argument with my fiancé, who had been awakened by this absurdity. I'm not going to hear the end of this during regular waking hours, of course. In a subtle way, I hoped she would wake up and complain about me, so my mother would scold her for phoning us at such an inappropriate hour. However, I am aware that my mother will point out that I should have been a bit more polite. To be honest, I believe I did okay by refraining from using profanity during the discussion. Perhaps I'm simply talking about my zero expletive tolerance. Update. It turns out that by making a joke about my cousin calling my mom to complain about me, I jinxed myself because she actually did just that. She awoke my hardworking, impoverished mother to spy on me. In my opinion, my mother is a complete gem, yet I have witnessed her attack others like a rogue chainsaw. Her charming fairy act wasn't a lie to me. Tinkerbell has a tendency to be petty. She mentioned that she said some words, which is her way of stating that she cursed. But she didn't tell me exactly what she said. After saying one sentence, she hung up. My mom contacted my cousin back to get the whole story when she had gotten up and had her coffee. She gave me a call at that point. My mom questioned me. Did you make a Star Trek reference during a conversation with your cousin? As to why you wouldn't be able to have dinner with her kids? As soon as I answered, and I could tell, she was struggling to maintain her composure while being a mother. Indeed, I did. Since I only have a car and still need to pay gas, she was giving the impression that I had a transporter in my pocket. Over the phone, I could definitely hear her trying not to laugh. Honey, I don't think she gets your sense of humor. Well, that should come as no surprise, given that we don't even know one another. At that moment, my mom burst out laughing so loudly that my dad could hear it from a different room. Through the speaker, I could hear him laughing. My mother didn't have the strength to tell me to apologize just yet, even though I know she wanted to. She advised me to wait till my cousin had calmed down a bit, but she would keep me updated. I was traveling to work at the time of this call, which is what nearly caused me to crash my car. I understand that what your cousin did was absurd, but do you think it was appropriate to laugh at her? My mother asked. I won't reveal precisely what Mom told me next, but it seems that in her initial outburst, she had come up with a rather colorful moniker for my cousin. Then word appeared in the name, but don't worry, we're all black. I had never heard my mother use that word in my entire life. She was so furious that I'm shocked she was able to contact this woman back, much less engage in a normal discussion. Therefore, the first believe it should be clear that nobody in this household should be concerned about my urinating. I'm a bundle of kittens in comparison to my mom when she's exhausted. Second, update. From now on, I shall refer to her as this raccoon dog, since I have officially had enough of her. Her name is in my contacts as well. Get ready to be as mistaken as I was, if you believe that the entitlement and rudeness couldn't get much worse. I suppose I'm simply an expletive fool if you did believe that things might get worse. I decided to work on a new beer recipe I had developed since I had today off. So there I was, with my brew pot, in the kitchen. To put things in perspective, the first step in making beer at home is to prepare the wort, which is essentially your sugar water. In order to add malt extracts, the grains are first boiled in a kettle or stock pot, and then the heat is turned off. Before boiling the liquid once more, you must stir until the extracts dissolve. Hops are then added, adding a range of tastes and bitterness. In instance, I utilize several components that I produce myself during the initial boil, making my brews a little more complex. Because these materials take a long time to mature, I make sure not to squander any of it. Later on, this will be significant. The raccoon dog from hell called me while I was relaxing and doing my thing. My curiosity overcame me, and I answered after, considering leaving her on voicemail. Hey, hi, this is Rode. Oh, hello. What is going on? I wanted to express my regret for the other day. The time didn't even cross my mind. Usually I stay up quite late talking to someone, unable to relate. Yes, I do feel that. No worries, internally fuming, so pay attention. I was hoping you would think twice about hanging out with blah and blah, even though I know we had a rough start. I know you were worried since you don't know each other, and they don't know anyone in that town. I understand. All I want is for them to be with someone they feel at ease with. Now, as I've stated in other remarks, I believe it to be very reasonable. She is their mother after all, and is presumably merely attempting to ensure that college is enjoyable for them. Personally, I detested attending classes and spending so much time with strangers. I took online classes and stayed at home since I didn't like the idea of mingling at college. I told her that I understood exactly where she was coming from. I appreciate your understanding. Now, your mother informed me that due to your job, these things must be planned for you in advance, RD said. Since we'll all be getting together anyhow. I was thinking about Thanksgiving or Christmas. Yes, of course. I don't see why not, as we'll all be at the same location anyhow. Excellent, many thanks. They will be quite thrilled. Fantastic. With a gentle click-clack, I put the brew kettle back on the hot stove and said, Sounds good. Are you preparing a meal? Yes. You can cook, don't you? What are you producing? I am brewing wort for a new recipe that I am experimenting with. Wort? What is that? Oh, it's beer sugar base. I apologize. Did you mention beer? Yes. Are you brewing beer? Yes. Oh, is your mom aware of what you're doing? I suppose so, since she knows I can make it. Awkward quiet. I said beer, not cocaine. Didn't you hear me? Are you also able to make that? No. You're acting like I'm breaking something, so I asked. Well, I'm just worried about the potential impact that could have on the children. Perhaps don't bring that up when you're hanging around. I am already aware that certain conventional families may not find my interests and employment choice suitable. But I would be dishonest if I claimed that her reaction and treatment of something I'm really passionate about didn't make me feel a bit upset. Only because I was going to see them over the holidays. And since I don't really discuss my passions in front of my family out of respect, and to prevent any drama did I not decline the hangout and end the call at that moment. Therefore, it wouldn't have been a problem. I simply agreed and rolled my eyes. Fantastic? All right, the final item. I am aware that the neighborhood has a large number of affordable apartments and student housing. Therefore, I wanted to know which ones we ought to investigate that would be both close to the school and you. This is the point at which reality set in. To be honest, I smiled a little. Well, the rates are fairly reasonable for a two-bedroom apartment, and it's about a 5 to 10 minute walk from the school. That's amazing. You two might live next door. Yes, regarding that. Actually, before the year ends, we will be relocating to the city where I work, which is over 40 minutes away. So we won't be in the area. Oh, hold on. I'm not really paying attention. Are you stating that you will not be able to visit them? Put Britney Spears' WTF expression here. Actually, no. Not at all. We are moving closer to our employment, so that we won't have to drive as far, which is the main goal. But you do it all the time, so I just don't understand why you couldn't go see them once or twice a week. Well, that would be really inconvenient for me. That doesn't seem very likely to me. Is spending a couple hours with your family inconvenient? Do you not make the extra drive to your parents' city? Yeah, but traffic is typically the cause. So you go see them despite though you'll be even farther away when you move. I don't understand why it's so inconvenient for you to drive halfway to see your relatives, especially on days like today when you should be spending time with your family instead of creating booze. Simply put, I think your priorities are a little out of order. For the remainder of this talk, my brain decided that civility was unnecessary and pushed it into a locked closet, despite the fact that I have painfully and deliberately chosen my words throughout all of our conversations. I'm sorry. Did you really just compare the level of importance between your kids, who I have said exactly 0 words to in my entire 28 years of life, to my parents? I exploded. All right, honey. Let me start by saying that I have no idea to whom you are speaking. Once more, who the explicit are you? Again, what do I owe you? What time or portion of my day do you deserve to reclaim? Why have you returned to my life? If we hadn't crossed paths again, what would I miss? Oh, nothing, since I don't know you explicitly. Furthermore, I don't have an attic, so I don't care if you choose to move in. Years before I can even recall your explicit name, I'm going to visit my folks and deliver them all the homemade alcohol I desire, and explicit you for diverting my attention, as my explicit ward is now ruined due to my kettle boiling over. I nearly lost it when I heard my fiancé laugh out loud in the adjacent room, but that was in the heat of the moment. I sounded like an irate Bubbles from the Powerpuff Girls, he said later. Since I was so focused on getting the sticky mess of my damaged mixture off my stove and floor before my cat could get to it. I honestly can't recall if she said anything else after that. I hung up after saying an irate "see you on Thanksgiving," which was all I could manage in my annoyance. Although I haven't heard from anybody else since. I'm quite certain that nobody will have the audacity to bring it up, given how out of character that blow up was for me. I don't get angry very often. So, when I do, my parents usually just make sure I'm all right and prevent anyone from bringing it up later. I have to give my fiance credit for making me laugh so fast at the absurd noise I made when I saw the pot boil over when he came to assist me clean up the mess. I asked him in jest if he believed I would be punished for that outburst. He claimed that he believes I frightened her enough to make her temporarily retreat to her trash den. Third update. I have had nothing to do at all for the first time since Thanksgiving. We appreciate everyone who took the time out of their day to read this, as it will be the final installment of this chaotic roller coaster. I'm glad I could keep you entertained. I know that most of you were anticipating some kind of media circus monstrosity family meal, but this is the moment you've all been waiting for. To be honest, so did I. However, this year, the goddess of chaos chose to be my best friend and made the holiday absolutely ideal for me. My family's Thanksgiving was canceled. My fiance and I had to work on Black Friday. My grandma stayed at home in remembrance of my grandfather, and my parents traveled to see my brother. Thus, we peacefully spent Thanksgiving at home. We watched a marathon of horror films while snuggled in our pajamas and enjoying a delectable supper and fantastic drinks that I had made. I was swooning over it like a fat cat in a tuna factory, and it was flawless. Then my phone rang. Though I choose to disregard the number because I didn't recognize it. They left a voicemail, but they could wait until tomorrow because I was on vacation for the holidays. Another call was received a few minutes later. The same figure. Then another. And yet another. And yet another. Then another. As the logical genius that he is, my fiance recommended that I listen to the message, which I had entirely forgotten about. I turned it on so we could hear it. This is your landlord, F1. Since the workplace is plainly closed, I'm using my personal phone. I apologize for disturbing your vacation, but I must have a call from you as soon as possible. You're probably wondering where the raccoon dog comes in. But I phoned her back in a panic because I had missed around 8 calls from this woman by this time. Oh, baby. It's going to feel like Christmas. I don't have the entire discussion committed to memory, but I know I can get it very near. I remember what I said. And my landlord wasn't very professional throughout this call. Don't judge. But I would have been furious too. I gave my landlord a call. Hey. She sounded as though she had discovered an entire turkey in the toilet. Hey. I'm so sorry. I didn't know this was you. And I began. No, honey. I understand. Like everyone else, you were having a great time on vacation. Please don't even think about it. She cut me off. Here's a nervous laugh. So what is going on? What's happening? Are you familiar with a woman named Raccoon Dog? She inquired. Her name was still a mystery to me. So I said, not off the top of my head, no. All right. So she's been berating our courteous cop for the last hour and a half, and she knows you. She claimed that after you invited her children over, she is unable to contact you. Make sure that explicit didn't interpret my "see you on Thanksgiving" remark from our most recent phone conversation as an invitation to visit my house. I'm still having trouble connecting the dots at this point because I haven't spoken to this person in a month. And I was freaking out like a squirrel attempting to cross a busy street, because my first thought, when my landlord called me on her cell phone on Thanksgiving, was eviction notice. I clarified that neither of us had invited anyone. Thus, I had no idea who this could be. See, that's what I thought. Because you guys don't ever really have nobody around like that anyway. My landlord said, going into full nail salon black lady mode. Given that my fiancé and I are antisocial recluses, may my landlord rest in peace. The landlord went on, but she knows your identity, adding, and she has been requesting that we give her your room number without mentioning your fiancé. As in, really? No reputable business would simply divulge the information of its tenants in that manner. You would still be in violation of the law, even if we did. What is she doing? I inquired. She parked in front of the fire zone with her kids in the car and is shouting police brutality because our courtesy officer gave her a fine and told her that if she doesn't move, we're going to have her car towed, stated my landlady. My apartment complex is very close to the university, and the main road leading to the separate properties is a frequently used route directly to many of the university buildings, as well as a third of the fraternities. They take this very, very, very seriously, and if there were a fire in that area, that section would most definitely be blocked off. Please note that the fine for parking in front of a fire zone here ranges from $500 to $2. Oh, depending on the location and severity of the situation. Did she relocate? I inquired. No, my landlord retorted. She threatened the courtesy officer after receiving a fine for the fire zone. Her children are still in the car, and he had to phone for assistance. My fiancé, seated next to me, burst out laughing like a crazy person as I cackled, clearly still in a panic because I still didn't know who this was. Yo, it's Raccoon Dog. My fiancé texted my mother. 55 what? What dog? My landlady interrupted. This poor woman sounded so defeated and worn out as she questioned. Can you formally state that you didn't invite her and don't want her here? I told her everything from the beginning, and I could hear all the energy leave her body as she started laughing. This stunning woman said, "Okay, I got this expletive," in response to my confirmation. You guys have an incredibly nice Thanksgiving. We hung up. I couldn't stop thinking about this woman's children and how ashamed they must have been. I don't understand how I haven't heard from someone who has fled at this point. I was silently shocked, incredulous, and trying not to laugh. My fiancé clicked play on our movie and said, "Eat, watch." I honestly didn't know what to say, so I just followed his instructions, trying not to choke on my food from laughter. I tried to think of anything to say, but all I did was open my mouth before he stopped me with, "Nope, nope, 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 nope." When I later learned that RD had gotten in touch with her, my mother threw the biggest fit, accusing me of lying to her about spending Thanksgiving with her children. It seems that during the same phone call where I yelled at her, she was fined $2. By the courtesy officer assigned by my landlord. And to make matters worse, her husband had to pay $3,500 to bail her out of jail, and she was hit with an additional $7,500 fine for trespassing, resisting arrest, and threatening violence toward a police officer. Yes, I didn't even have to do anything, yet I am the expletive worst. It all began with a random, unsolicited phone call in the middle of the night a couple of months ago, and I'm still struggling to put the situation into words, and I'm trying to persuade myself that it really happened. The piece de resistance. 2 days ago, her children created a group chat on one of my social media accounts with the three of us, apologizing for their crazy mother and all the crap she said about me spending time with them. Did you think that was the best part? They said that what happened on Thanksgiving was the last straw for them, even though they had been wanting to apologize on her behalf for some time, but were so ashamed that they decided to just leave me alone. These kids spent most of their Thanksgiving sitting in a car in front of a random apartment complex, and then they sat in a police station for an indeterminate amount of time until their dad could come get them. They knew their mom would be in jail overnight, and that bailing her out would blow half their Christmas fund, which, yeah. Imagine spending Thanksgiving stuck in a spectacle of pure insanity brought on by your delusional mother. "There's a really great pizza place up the street," was all I could reply. "I'm off next Friday, and it's on me. I'm not sure what your schedules look like. This weekend, I have a pizza date and a restraining order, a match made in heaven." This whole thing has been such a cluster expletive dumpster explosion, and I hope you all liked sitting in it with me as much as I enjoyed writing it. I skipped the family cruise. After being asked to buy my own ticket, now they're upset they can't reach me. For the holidays, my folks wanted to take a cruise. My brother, 28M, his girlfriend, 26F, my boyfriend, 27M, and I, 25, were invited. The golden child has always been my brother, who we'll call James. Some background. when James was caught selling pills in high school. It was written off as just a phase. In the meantime, my parents threatened to expel me after I was found smoking marijuana. Despite dropping out of college 3 times and losing his scholarship, James is still seen as ideal. I was told I didn't put in enough effort when I graduated a semester late. I dwell in my home state, close to my parents, while James continues to reside in the place where he went to college. He doesn't go to school or work. My parents often purchase tickets for him to travel to see them, but they won't purchase a ticket for me to travel to see him or anywhere else. He recently purchased a $2,000 dog with the money they provide him for rent and other expenses. My parents promptly removed me from their insurance when I was 22 and got my first big job since I could receive benefits. James, meanwhile, continued to be covered by their insurance until his 20th birthday. I returned to living with my parents in order to save money after being laid off last year. My parents, who had never talked about it previously, insisted that I pay $10,000 in back rent when I started a new job. I recently moved in with my boyfriend after paying it off in the end. I've always had this pattern in my life. James gets everything while I have to put in a lot of effort. Let's go on the cruise now. My parents ordered tickets for James, his fiancée, and themselves after announcing their plans. They advised me to purchase my own ticket because I work at a well-paying job. Being the only one forced to purchase my own ticket infuriated me, so I told them it wasn't fair. Due to holiday arrangements with his family, my partner was unable to attend. My parents said, "Green doesn't look good on you," and accused me of being pampered. It's a phrase I'm so sick of hearing. It's not like you need a nice room because we'll be outside most of the time anyway, they continued. Perhaps that is the case. Then why did James receive a good room? I informed them I was leaving because I had had enough. I may be the jerk here though, because I gave them the impression that I was still going for months. They instructed me to arrive at their house by 8 a.m. The night before, they were scheduled to depart so that we could begin the drive to the port at 08:30. They began messaging me the following morning, inquiring about my whereabouts. I responded to your SMS by saying, "I'll be at my boyfriend's Thanksgiving instead, since you didn't want to make the effort to have me join you. Enjoy your vacation with your beloved youngster." I then turned off the chat. I discussed this with a few friends. Some people thought it was rude to abruptly cancel, while others felt I should have accepted the situation and gone anyway, since I would have likely enjoyed myself once I was there. Now that they've been on the cruise for a few days, I'm beginning to feel bad about the way I handled things. It's not like I couldn't afford the ticket, so I'm sure I would have enjoyed myself. Additionally, I could have communicated my point more effectively. However, I'm also rather tired of their treating me in this manner. Is it my fault for calling off our family's vacation? Update 1. Of course, I'll start by paying the $10,000 in overdue rent. I didn't think the number was the problem. It's obviously a little higher than I would have preferred, but not unreasonably so, given how long I stayed there. It's not as though I could have gotten a better deal on renting my own house. I would have spent all of my cash and most likely accrued debt while I was unemployed if I hadn't moved in with them. I worked as a server and did some freelance writing while I was searching for a new career in my profession. So I was helping to pay for groceries but not electricity or rent. As a result, when I found work again, I could see why my parents needed financial assistance. I only wish that expectation had been clearer from the start, rather than being thrown at me as a surprise. I understood that having me stay for so long, especially while they were renovating their house, was inconvenient for them, so I paid for it. Pushing back didn't seem worthwhile. It just felt easier to pay the money, and I know that if I had refused, it would have become a major problem. Yes, it's likely that I need to work on my pushover tendencies. Fortunately, I work as a technical writer, which pays well. So after I started my new job, I was able to save money for a move-out and pay my parents back in approximately 6 months. For those who are interested in the chronology, in January of last year, I lost my job. I moved in with my parents after using my money to cover my rent until my lease expired in June. From June of last year until September of this year, when I moved in with my partner, I lived with them. My parents informed me that they wanted back rent and future rent till I moved out when I started my present job in May. They claimed it was to encourage me to stand again. Technically, not all of it was back rent, but I used the term to be succinct. The entire sum came to $10,000 by the time I moved out, and I had already settled the majority of it. A few responses mentioned taking my parents to court, but I don't think that's worth it, or even feasible. I didn't protest paying it, and we never had a formal contract. That wasn't something I wanted them to remember. Any legal matter would only rehash everything, and I would prefer not to do that. At least it's done now that it's paid. I'm aware that I should probably resist their demands more in the future. Since everything has been like way my entire life, it's just challenging. I've learned from my experiences that if I refuse, they would perceive me as unappreciative. I strive for perfection because all I want is for them to care for and support me in the same way that they do James. The worst thing is that I was quite close to James as a child. We spent a lot of time together as children. I was taught how to ride a bike by him. When I was being bullied, he defended me. He just never learned how to be independent, and I don't think that makes him a horrible person at all. He doesn't understand why I have problems with our parents, which has caused tension in our relationship. I miss playing RuneScape with my brother late at night. Since he has consistently received additional assistance, I'm rather certain he fully accepts the notion that he needs it. He has no idea what else to do or anticipate. He still treats me nicely, at least, but he doesn't recognize the difference in our treatment. In essence, he wants me to accept it and become a member of the family. Unfortunately, once it came to problems with our parents, all of his support simply vanished. One day, I hope James will gain some distance from them so we can get back in touch. I do not wish for our relationship to continue to suffer as a result of this. I apologize for being so sentimental, but let's get back to the comments. I also saw that some people wanted to know why I hadn't informed them sooner that I was canceling. They would have spent those months attempting to get me to go and humiliating me if I persisted in refusing. But I see that was a petty move on my behalf. It looked like a lot of work, and my method was much simpler. I did receive some joy from it, albeit perhaps this is embarrassing of me. Treating them the same way they treat me was satisfying. Furthermore, it didn't really affect their trip. They traveled nonetheless, only without me. The idea of having little to no contact with my family was mentioned in a lot of the comments, and I've been thinking about it ever since. My boyfriend, who has witnessed my parents' behavior firsthand, supports this choice. If I tell my pals the whole tale, I'm sure they'll be on board as well. I've tried to avoid discussing the family dynamic with my friends since I find it depressing, and most of them have never met my parents. Additionally, I didn't want to come across as constantly complaining. They had only heard a few minor grievances here and there before. Having said that, the following is what has transpired since my last post. Late on Wednesday night, my boyfriend and I arrived at the cottage. His mother adored the bouquet I sent her, which included her favorite flowers. Before going to bed, we chatted with his family and had a small glass of wine. They didn't seem to mind that I wasn't as jovial as usual because I was still a little unsure about my choices. I promised myself that evening that I would ignore my personal family problems and concentrate solely on enjoying the trip with my boyfriend's family, who have always been so kind to me. We got up early on Thursday and assisted his mother in preparing various meals and arranging the table. After that, I played cornhole with his cousins, but we lost because I'm not that athletic. The actual Thanksgiving lunch was excellent. His mother cooks really well. I felt much better about choosing to spend the holidays with them because everyone was so kind to me and made me feel like a member of the family. His mother even told me at the conclusion of the evening that she hopes I will be able to live with the family someday, even though she knows it is ultimately up to my partner. We hugged after I assured her that I would be honored if that occurred. I sincerely hope it will. I wanna be with my partner for the rest of my life since I love him so much. His family is an amazing benefit as well. Throughout Thanksgiving and the remainder of the weekend, I had a great time. We watched movies, played board games, hung out by the bonfire, and went on some amazing hikes. My partner also took care of his young nephew for a while. I definitely got a little baby fever from watching them play with Legos together. But I don't want to act on it for at least a few years. I've already missed everything since we returned yesterday afternoon. There was no family drama, which made my own family appear even more dysfunctional. And it was truly a blast. I feel like I'm babbling a little bit now. In all honesty, I probably have been. But I'm just so happy to convey how much fun I had during the holiday, and how I made the correct choice. Regretfully, there are some negative aspects to this upgrade. I hope it is. Last night, my parents contacted me to express their continued dissatisfaction with my decision. I suppose they weren't sufficiently relaxed by the sea air and free beverages. Sad that you chose not to be with your family in such beautiful places. My dad wrote in a passive-aggressive text message that included cruise photos. It seems like you guys had a good time, I answered, sending back a photo from my trip with my boyfriend's family. We did too. My mother then called to express her sadness that I had spoiled their memories and missed out on a wonderful family holiday because of a small grievance against my brother. I informed her that their unjust preferential treatment of us was my problem, not James's. Since James needs help while he figures out his direction in life, and I've always been considerably more independent. My mother felt that I was being unjust by drawing comparisons between our circumstances. They never really let me rely on them, so that's the only reason that's true, I informed her. She stated that I should either grow up and be thankful for everything they have done, or leave them alone for good, and shatter their hearts all at once rather than piece by piece. She also said she would not apologize for raising a self-sufficient daughter, even though they appeared to be doing just well without me, based on the pictures my dad provided and what they shared on social media. She accused me of being heartless for dangling the hope of a wonderful holiday, only to snatch it away at the last second. By this time, I was furious and gave her several examples of how they put James first, in the hopes that she would finally realize how this upbringing has impacted me. Considering that I am childless and have never had to make difficult choices, my mother thought I had a lot of nerve to scrutinize their parenting. I guess I'll just leave you guys alone like you want, since I'll never be enough for this family anyway, I remarked, tired of the conversation. As usual, my boyfriend provided me with a lot of support, even though I ended the call crying. To lift my spirits, we watched The Hunger Games and ate ice cream for the remainder of the evening. I adore the series and can't wait for the new film to be out. After everything, it seemed weird to return to work today and pretend nothing had happened. However, I believe it served as a useful diversion as well. With the exception of last night's events, I actually returned from my vacation feeling more rested than I probably would have after the cruise, because I had chosen my boyfriend's plans rather than my family's. Although my parents haven't responded to me yet, I suspect they're bluffing. They'll definitely get in touch if they need something, or they'll likely attempt to make things work out before Christmas, so they won't have to tell our wider family about it. I'm still not sure if I'll be amenable to making amends. Despite the fact that I have done so much for them, I know I deserve better than to be viewed as an afterthought and a burden. I'm fed up with trying to meet their standards, and I don't think their behavior will ever change. However, it's so hard to completely leave them because they are my family. All I want is to experience the same level of acceptance and affection from my own family as I do from my boyfriend's. Why do they find it so difficult to treat me as though I'm important? Additionally, I'm afraid that if I don't be kind to them, they'll fabricate a tale to blame me. And my extended family will also be upset with me. Although my parents have a significant impact on everyone's viewpoints, there are some members of my family who I like. I'm not sure if it would be better to accept the loss and move on from a dynamic where I'm obviously not valued, or if it would be worth putting up with them in order to maintain some ties to my family. At the very least, I want to keep my brother, but perhaps I'm clinging to the past and that James is no longer there. I hope that isn't the case. My parents have brainwashed him into believing they are infallible, so I'm not sure how to approach him. I doubt that I will ever be able to fully regain my brother. Right now, I have a lot on my mind, and I'm not sure if I'm prepared to make such a significant life change. I do think that if I at least kept my distance from them, or perhaps stopped talking to them completely, I would feel a lot lighter and more liberated. My husband demanded a DNA test moments after I gave birth, But he underestimated what I'd do to protect my daughter and our legacy. The words that just came out of my husband's mouth are far worse than the pain that rips through me like a sharp blade. Adam comes forward, his pricey suit immaculately ironed, despite the 12 hours we've spent in this delivery room. While I'm still gasping for air, trembling and drenched in sweat, he says, "I want a DNA test." In a flat, impersonal voice that sounds like he's ordering coffee rather than asking about our baby daughter's paternity. With her hand still holding our baby, my baby, the nurse freezes. The beeping monitors suddenly become too loud and obtrusive, and the room appears to shrink. Dr. Collins's wrinkled face wrinkles in worry as he looks up from his charts. My voice sounds odd and aloof, as if it were someone else's. "Adam, what are you talking about?" I ask. He refuses to look at me. Rather, he looks at our 7-pound daughter. 4 ounces of excellence with calculating coldness. "You heard me, McKenna. I want proof she's mine." Like poison gas, the accusation lingers in the air. This is the result of 12 years of marriage. To make him feel even a small portion of the agony pulsing through my chest, I want to shout and throw something. Rather, I chuckle. It's an unpleasant sound, bitter and nasty. Get out. The words make my tongue taste like metal. Get out before I call security. Dr. Collins begins, "Mrs. Harrison." But Adam interrupts. He takes out his phone and runs his fingers across the screen, saying, "I have every right to be here, and every right to request this test." My lawyer says, "Your lawyer. You've been talking to your lawyer while I was in labor," I blurt out. The only indication that he is still capable of feeling guilt is a faint flush that appears on his neck. I've been preparing for this moment for weeks. The word keeps repeating in my mind. Weeks. My husband was organizing this ambush as I was folding little onesies and choosing nursery colors. I feel as though I've been physically struck by the understanding. Bless the nurse. She puts herself in our way. "Sir, perhaps we should continue this discussion outside." No. I ignore my aching body's protest and push myself to sit up taller. Let him stay. Let him watch the test. Let him see exactly how wrong he is. Something flickers in Adam's eyes, but his expression remains unchanged. Disappointment? Solace? I can no longer tell. I used to be familiar with all telltale signs and micro-expressions. At what point did my husband lose his identity? "I'll set it up right away," Dr. Collins states in a deliberately casual tone. "Though I must say, in my 30 years of practice, just do it," instructs Adam. I used to find his nervous habit of straightening his tie charming. The sooner we know the truth, the better. The reality. As though he still knows what that word implies. My girl, our daughter, is sleeping soundly in the bassinet, oblivious to the storm that is building all around her. Her dark hair, like mine, is already beginning to curl, and her little fingers are balled into fists. Even though my hands are shaking, I answer, "Fine," in a calm voice. "Do the test. But when it proves what I already know, don't expect forgiveness." His phone buzzes. Adam. He looks at it, and his mask briefly comes off. Fear? Feeling guilty? He's on his way to the door before I can comprehend it. He says, "I'll be back tomorrow," without turning around. "My lawyer will contact you about the arrangements." I can breathe again as the door snaps shut behind him. Dr. Collins touches my shoulder tenderly. "McKenna, I'm so sorry." "Don't." I grab my phone, fingers already locating Sam's number. "I'll let my cousin know what to do. He always does. Just get me the paperwork for the test. And, Dr. Collins, make sure it's witnessed every step," I respond. His eyes light up with comprehension as he nods. Of course. I gaze at my daughter once more, committing to memory every exquisite feature of her face. Adam has no idea what he's started, regardless of the game he's playing, or the falsehoods he's telling himself. After 3 days in the hospital, Sam feels as though his flat is a haven. As Tara bustles around the kitchen brewing tea, I curl up with Emma on his worn leather couch. My worries are calmed by the familiar smell of coffee grounds and old books. But my hands continue to shake. Saying, "He's changed all the locks." I observe Sam pacing. Changed the security codes too. 12 years of marriage, and he locks me out like I'm some kind of criminal. With his journalist's notebook already stuffed with scrawled notes, Sam stops pacing. When exactly did things start changing with Adam? Think back carefully. The inquiry is a kind of gut strike. I close my eyes and attempt to remember when my marriage started to go apart. Maybe 4 months ago. He started working late, missing doctor's appointments. Said it was a big merger, the Preston Tech deal. Tara's expression is disturbed as she puts down a mug of chamomile tea. That closed months ago. I give it a quick glance. How do you know that? Tara looks at Sam and says, because my sister works in their PR department. The deal fell through in March. March, when Adam began bringing pricey new suits home. When the enigmatic business travel started. When he completely stopped caressing me, Sam taps his pen against the notebook and says, this is what doesn't add up. Why wait until the baby was born to demand a DNA test? Why not do it during pregnancy? Because he needed a scene, states Tara in a low voice. He needed witnesses. It dawns on me like a blast of cold water. He's building a case against me. Emma stirs in my arms, and I instinctively move her blanket. Her little face reminds me of how calm and trustworthy I used to be. Reluctantly, Sam says, there's something else. I made some calls. Adam's been meeting with divorce attorneys since January. January, I mumble. Looking down at Emma, I caught myself saying, when I first told him I was pregnant. When he smiled and hugged me and said everything was perfect. That son of a why go through with the pregnancy if he was planning this all along? Because of the Harrison family trust, Tara responds accordingly. Your father-in-law's will had specific conditions about heirs, didn't it? Things begin to come together. Even when I say, the trust only pays out if there are legitimate children, my voice sounds empty? He needed proof the baby wasn't his to invalidate the claim. Sam's phone is buzzing. His face darkens as he looks at it. Adam just posted on LinkedIn. He's accepted a new position at Grant Technologies. Grant. The name makes me think of something. Wait, isn't that the company that tried to buy out Harrison Industries last year? Sam concludes. The same one your father-in-law refused to sell to before he died. We all jump when someone knocks on the door. Glancing through the peephole, Tara takes a rapid step back. It's Adam. Don't open it, I say, holding Emma tighter. Adam's words, McKenna, echo through the door. I know you're in there. The DNA test is scheduled for tomorrow morning. My lawyer insists you be present. I take Sam's arm as he approaches the door. Wait, let him talk. Adam goes on. You're making this harder than it needs to be. His voice becoming almost soft. Just come home. We can work this out. I slowly get to my feet so as not to wake Emma. Work what out, Adam? The lies? The secret meetings? Or how about the trust fund you're trying to steal? Quiet, then. I don't know what you think you know. I know enough. I no longer tremble when I say this. I know about Grant Technologies. I know about the divorce lawyers. And soon, I'll know everything else too. One more pause. The veneer of tenderness vanishes when he talks again. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Neither do you. Something hardens inside me as I gaze down at our girl, my daughter. Game on, Adam. He backtracks along the corridor. What's the plan? Asks Sam after locking the door and turning to face me. I take my phone out and go through my old contacts until I locate the one I need. First, we find out everything we can about Grant Technologies. And then, I answer the phone. We call in some favors. Before a recognizable voice responds, the phone rings again. Dr. Collins? I need your help with something. With a somber expression, Dr. Collins slips the phone across his desk. These messages were automatically backed up to the cloud account you shared. I thought you should see them. When I take up the smartphone, my hands shake. 2 days before my labor, the timestamp indicates 03:47 am. The message says, everything's arranged. Once the test results come back, she won't have any claim to the trust. Make sure you stick to the plan. Adam has responded. She suspects nothing. Just keep your father focused on the merger. Evelyn Grant, says Dr. Collins softly, is Marcus Grant's daughter. I find the name to be bitter. Last year, he attempted to compel my father-in-law to sell his business. With his journalistic instincts taking over, Sam leans forward. The same Marcus Grant who mysteriously acquired 3 board seats after your father-in-law's death. I continue to scan through texts, each one getting worse. Plans, gatherings, personal information that makes my stomach turn. They've been seeing each other since January, I murmur. The same month I told him about the baby? Sam asserts. The timing is not coincidental. Grant Technologies announced their hostile takeover bid last week. With Adam's help, they'll have controlling interest in Harrison Industries, unless there's a legitimate heir. The parts fit together perfectly. That's why he needs the DNA test to show Emma isn't his. It's not about the baby at all. It's about the company. We are interrupted by a knock. Tara enters with a pallid face. Adam's here with lawyers. Even though my heart is racing, I make myself remain composed. Let them in. Adam walks in with 2 suits that probably cost more than my yearly income, as if he owns the place. He's wearing a tie I've never seen before, and he seems different, colder, sharper. Dr. Collins begins. This is a private medical facility, but Adam interrupts. The elder attorney says, my client has every right to supervise the paternity test that we're conducting. We have concerns about potential tampering. I chuckle. I'm unable to stop it. Tampering? That's rich, coming from you. Adam clenches his jaw. Careful, McKenna. You're already facing potential fraud charges if I raise the phone and ask, if what? If these messages somehow become public? The ones showing you and Evelyn planning to steal your father's company? He becomes motionless. I catch a glimpse of genuine terror in his eyes. You had access to my private. I go up and exclaim, your private messages on our shared cloud account. My rage giving me courage. The one you forgot to disconnect when you were so busy planning your little corporate takeover. Adam's visage darkens as the younger attorney murmurs something in his ear. He responds, this changes nothing, but his tone falters. The test will proceed exactly as planned. In a strong tone, Dr. Collins interrupts. Under my supervision, with witnesses present. Unless you'd prefer to explain to the board why you're colluding with Grant Technologies while serving as Harrison Industries CFO. Sam moves forward while Adam's hand fumbles with his phone. I wouldn't, answers Sam with ease. My article about corporate espionage at Grant Technologies goes live in an hour. Fascinating stuff about insider trading and family betrayal. Adam responds, you're bluffing, yet his forehead is dripping with perspiration. I approach while speaking quietly. You want a war, Adam? Fine. But remember, you taught me everything about corporate finance during those late-night strategy sessions. Everything. I stop and show him his most recent communication to Evelyn, which was about love and eternity. Always keep receipts. The elder lawyer clears his throat as they look at one another. Perhaps we should discuss terms. No terms, I respond, observing Adam's flawless exterior crumble. No deals. You wanted to play dirty? Let's play. But remember, you're not just fighting for money anymore. You're fighting for survival. Adam's shoulders are stiff with rage as they depart. Sam lets out a faint whistle. That was something? I sit back down and mutter, just the beginning, as my legs feel like they might give out. Dr. Collins, how long until the test results? 24 hours, he responds, closely examining me. Are you sure about this? Once we start, I interrupt, I'm sure, in a firm voice. I look at the picture of him and my father-in-law during his medical school graduation that is on his desk. He trusted the wrong people. I won't make the same mistake. Sam gives me a shoulder squeeze. What's next? I take out my phone and navigate to a number I never would have imagined using. Next, we talk to Evelyn Grant. It's time she learned what kind of man she's really dealing with. With its sky-high steel and glass, the Grant Technologies lobby shines with riches and power. Feeling small, I shift Emma's carrier on my arm till I see my reflection in the gleaming marble. Adam got me this suit for board meetings, and it's one of his favorite suits. The armor is what counts, even though it fits differently now. The receptionist says, Miss Grant is in a meeting without even looking up. I say, tell her McKenna Harrison is here, in a firm voice with her fiancé's baby. Keys no longer click. Her eyes enlarge when she notices Emma's dark locks, which resemble Adam's a lot. Evelyn Grant and I are seated opposite one another in her corner office, 5 minutes later. She's younger than I anticipated, and she's immaculately groomed, in a way that befits careful breeding and old money. Her 3-carat princess-cut engagement ring, which is identical to the one in Adam's browsing history, catches the light. She claims, I don't understand, but her hands deceive her by twisting a pen till her knuckles turn white. Adam never mentioned a wife. a baby. Emma fusses, but I handle it with practiced D's. Funny how those details slip his mind when he's planning corporate takeovers. The color fades from her face. You can't prove. With screenshots visible, I move my phone across her desk. Actually, I can. The question is, what will your father say when he learns his perfect future son-in-law is still married? That he's using your relationship to manipulate Harrison Industries stock? You're lying, but she's already using her immaculately manicured finger to browse through the texts. Her expression hardens with each message. The DNA test is tomorrow, I add, observing her expression. Adam's quite confident about the results, almost like he knows something I don't. She glances up abruptly, terror and recognition flickering in her eyes. My phone is buzzing. My blood runs cold after reading Sam's text. Lab break-in last night. Security video was deleted. He wouldn't, Evelyn murmurs, more to herself than to me. Your father's company stands to gain millions if Harrison Industries falls, I say while leaning forward. And Adam stands to gain everything, unless there's a legitimate heir. She snaps the pen in her hands. Her immaculate desk calendar is marred by ink, which stains both merger dates and wedding venue appointments. Get out, she says tremblingly. Before I call security, I slowly stand up, drawing Emma next to me. You know what's funny? I ask in a cool yet incisive tone. He bought me that exact same ring 5 years ago. Promised me the same forever. Even used the same pet names. She shouts. I said, get out. I quietly remark, check his phone, and stop at the door. The one he keeps at his gym locker. The one with the real messages. She becomes motionless. How did you? And I say, because I was you once. I make my way to the door, and then stop again. Saying, young, in love, certain, he was different. Oh, and Evelyn, when you confront him, watch his left eyebrow. It twitches when he lies. On her broken face, the elevator doors close. I write to Sam, my hands shaking. It's done. Begin the second phase. He responds right away. Tara's lab contact, verified attempts at tampering. The test is being moved to a secure location by Dr. Collins. Another message from an unidentified phone appears. When I open it, my heart stops. Clever girl, writes Adam. You can't remember who taught you how to play chess, though. Check your email from Harrison Industries. If you don't leave the board within 1 hour, the creative accounting adjustments you assisted me with last year will be made public. It's your turn. I gaze at the screen, reliving the memories of late hours spent poring over spreadsheets, following Adam's instructions, and signing documents he insisted were standard. The realization of how long he has been planning this makes my stomach turn. Emma's little hand catches my finger as she stirs. I see my own resolve, my father-in-law's strength, and something else in her face that Adam never realized was part of the Harrison family's history. I call Dr. Collins. How quickly can you access the original audit files from last year? In response, already done. And McKenna, I found something interesting in your father-in-law's private records. Something about a contingency plan. I smile for the first time in days. Tell me everything. With its clean whiteness and security cameras monitoring our every step, the safe lab feels like a fortress. Adam's attorneys hover close by, while Dr. Collins stands at the testing station. His countenance, unreadable. Emma ignores the stress that permeates the room as she rests in her carrier. When Dr. Collins says the results will be available in 30 minutes, all parties will remain present. The door flings itself open. With mascara smearing her cheeks and her flawless poise ruined, Evelyn bursts in. I yell, you bastard. Adam takes a step back, his self-assured facade falling off. Evelyn, this isn't. She spits out the gym locker and throws her phone to him. It strikes the wall with a crash. 3 other women, and you're still married. The attorneys look at each other in horror. Sam stops him as he goes for his briefcase. Until we hear those results, Sam replies softly. Nobody leaves? Adam's uncomfortable gesture of straightening his tie is something I had nearly forgotten. This is ridiculous. Whatever McKenna told you, Evelyn interrupts him, her voice cracking. She didn't have to tell me anything. Your friend Marcus was quite helpful once I showed him the real numbers behind the Grant Technology merger. Adam's face loses color. You didn't. She smiles sharply and bitterly. Daddy's on his way with the SEC. A message from Tara says, security footage recovered, and my phone vibrates. A suspect in a lab break-in was identified. I give Dr. Collins the phone. After examining the picture, he turns to face Adam's younger attorney. The man begins to perspire. Interesting, says Dr. Collins in a cool but acerbic tone. Very interesting indeed. Adam looks from one of us to the other, calculating. I know the expression he gets when he's going to give up a piece to keep the game going. Adam says abruptly. The accounting irregularities, in a loud voice. McKenna signed off on all of them. She's just as culpable. With the exception of the backup plan, I break off, maintaining eye contact. The one my father-in-law left with Dr. Collins before he died. Adam becomes motionless. What? He knew Adam. About the embezzlement. About Grant Technologies. He documented everything, I add, now speaking steadily, including your attempts to access Emma's trust fund before she was even born. Clearing his throat, the senior attorney does so. Mr. Harrison, perhaps we should shut up. Adam's calmness totally breaks. His fists are clenched as he rounds on me. You're bluffing? Richard trusted me, Dr. Collins adds in a low, uncompromising voice. Not just as his doctor, but as executor of his estate, including the real will. The device emits a beep. Test findings are available. Sam stops Adam before he can get the printout. It's over, declares Sam. The SEC has everything: fake DNA test orders, embezzlement records, even your deals with Marcus. The hall reverberates with the sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps. Adam steps back from the entrance. McKenna, he adds, as his voice mellows into that accustomed cunning tone. We can still fix this, for Emma's sake? I say, don't you dare with words that burn like acid. Don't you dare use our daughter as a bargaining chip. The door opens. First to arrive are 2 SEC agents and Marcus Grant. Tara holds out her phone behind them, documenting everything. One agent says, Adam Harrison, you are being investigated for securities fraud. The events that follow are shown in slow motion. Adam rushes to the emergency room. The younger attorney tries to stop him. Sam shouts something about treachery. Emma is unaware of the mayhem and sleeps soundly in her carrier while it all. Dr. Collins holds out the test findings while touching my arm. Do you want to know? I look at the paper and go back to all the times I questioned whether Adam was telling the truth or if I had failed as a mother or a wife. I eventually respond, no, as I see my spouse get handcuffed by SEC officers. The results don't matter anymore. She's my daughter. That's all I need to know. Marcus Grant walks up, his expression solemn. Mrs. Harrison, we'll need your testimony tomorrow. I pull Emma in close. Right now, I'm taking my daughter home. I hear Adam yelling my name as we head out, desperate now, realizing what he's lost. I don't turn around. Not every game is worth winning. Some successes come from letting go rather than seeking retribution. Lawyers, testimony, and struggles for control of Harrison Industries are all part of tomorrow. But I've got all I need in my arms tonight. The boardroom at Harrison Industries is cooler than I recall. After the SEC probe was made public, half of the board left, so perhaps that's why there are empty seats. Perhaps it's the way Sam avoids eye contact with me, or the way Dr. Collins is constantly looking at his watch. Marcus Grant spreads paperwork across the gleaming table and declares the evidence is conclusive. The results of the DNA test were changed before they were sent to the lab. Adam's new attorney cuts in with a suave voice, however. Mrs. Harrison was complicit in the financial irregularities. According to my client, even I sound hollow when I explain. The signature on these documents was forged. I never can you demonstrate it? More documents are slid forward by the attorney. The evidence from these trading records indicates otherwise. During the relevant period, there were significant transfers to your personal account. As I recognize the account numbers, my hands shake. It's our joint account. The one Adam ordered, I cease keeping an eye on since he had it handled. This is absurd. Sam stands up suddenly. McKenna allegedly approved these transactions while she was on maternity leave. The lawyer has a shark-like smile. Timestamps indicate otherwise. The doctor clears his throat. Marcus Grant continues. The contingency plan has been compromised, his words tumbling like stones. Last night, someone gained access to Richard Harrison's personal documents. Everything is gone. The space whirls. I feel the earth move beneath me as I hold onto the edge of the table. That's not possible. The security procedures were bypassed. The attorney states in a tone that borders on empathetic. Using your login information and some really intriguing emails regarding offshore accounts. My phone is buzzing. I'm shivering after reading Tara's message. Emergency updates. Company stock is plunging. Reports regarding fraud at Harrison Industries' various levels are currently in the news. The DNA test fiasco is causing a lot of conjecture on social media. I can explain, but Adam's attorney raises his hand. He straightens his papers and stands up saying, save it for the SEC hearing. In the meantime, considering the situation, the board has called for an emergency vote of no confidence. You can't. The words grate on my throat. My father-in-law dedicated his life to this business. He had faith in me? Believed you? Adam's voice interrupts, causing me to wince. Despite the ankle monitor indicating his house imprisonment, he stood spotless in the doorway. As if I trusted you not to speak to Evelyn behind my back. You dare not with ease, he adds. The board needs stability. Someone who can weather this storm with clean hands. Thankfully, I have a deal with the SEC that calls for complete cooperation in return for a lighter sentence. The pieces fit together perfectly. The fake signatures, the corrupted data, and the meticulously crafted paper trail that leads directly to me. You're going to blame me for everything. The realization is bitter. The cover-up, the fraud, all of it. I told Evelyn that he twitches his left eyebrow. McKenna, you did this to yourself. If you had simply cooperated, did you play along? I get up so fast that my chair falls over. While you embezzled the inheritance of my daughter? Richard built everything, but you ruined it all? His grin turns ruthless. Regarding that, the initial results of the DNA test were really intriguing. There is silence in the room. Security personnel intervene as Sam approaches Adam. I mutter, "You're lying." But suspicion seeps in like poison. All those late hours at work, the enigmatic business trips, the way he avoided talking about nursery colors or baby names. Am I? He asks, as he takes out his phone and displays a test result that I have never seen before. Do you want to know how these genetic markers work? Dr. Collins begins to say something, but Adam's attorney interrupts him. In light of the situation, my client is ready to request complete custody. When evaluating a person's suitability for parenthood, the court typically disapproves of fraud and embezzlement. The world becomes extremely small. I saw Emma's face, her dark locks, her little fingers. Her early giggles and nighttime sobs are audible to me. The only thing that has felt genuine since this nightmare started is the weight of her in my arms. Adam whispers, "In an hour, the board will vote. Sign over your shares. Resign immediately, and perhaps we can set up supervised visitation." I sway and Sam takes my arm. "Don't, McKenna. My vision is blurry though, and I'm already reaching for the resignation letter." Sometimes giving up isn't the same as surrender. Sometimes the goal is to purchase time so that you can fight in a different way. At midnight, the atmosphere in Dr. Collins' office is different. His father's medical degrees are shadowed, and our footsteps are obscured by the constant buzz of backup generators. While Tara does her magic on the computer, Sam stands guard at the door. "I found it," she murmurs. The initial backup of the server. During the purge, Adam's crew didn't notice it. When I put in the flash drive, Richard Harrison gave me years ago his insurance policy, which I never imagined I'd need. My hands trembled. How much time? With her fingers gliding over the keyboard, Tara responds, 10 minutes to decrypt. If the passwords that your father-in-law used are still valid, the door slams open. Adam is standing there with 2 security officers on either side of him, his ankle monitor glaring accusingly in the dark. He replies, "I knew you'd try something desperate," as he enters and adjusts his handcuffs. However, breaking and entering. That will appear awful during the custody hearing. Sam shifts between us. "How did you discover?" Adam's eyes do not meet his smile. "Dr. Collins isn't as devoted as you believed. Everybody has a cost." Like the cost of Evelyn? The words have a harsh taste? Or did she only serve as a stepping stone? For a moment, he loses his cool. "You're not aware of the stakes." "Behind me," Tara whispers. 7 minutes. Adam narrows his gaze. "It won't matter what you're attempting to recover. Tomorrow morning, the board will cast its vote. Your resignation has already been handled." As I watch the progress meter creep, I remark, resignations are a funny thing. If they were signed under duress, or if the person requesting them is engaging in fraud, they are not valid. He chuckles, but there's a hint of doubt. "There is nothing you can prove." 15 minutes? Tara replies. Adam gives the guards a signal. "Stop it. Right now?" I move forward and play my final card, saying, "Wait. The actual DNA is the outcome. Let me see them. We have experienced this. Either show me, or I send the CC everything we discover, including every email, transaction, and encounter with Marcus Grant." He twitches his left eyebrow. "You're playing a bluff." 3 minutes, declares Tara. The security personnel approach the PC. Sam stiffens, prepared to step in. Adam's words, "She's yours," stop everyone cold. The actual DNA test demonstrates that she is yours. I needed leverage, so I changed the outcomes. I just sense clarity, even though the admission should be painful. In any case, you never desired her, did you? She was merely another resource to manage. For 2 minutes? Tara replies. At last, Adam's facade breaks. "Do you believe this has to do with a baby?" Power is at issue here. Command. "All of the promises Richard made to me when he appointed me CFO, I whisper. He promised you a legacy, not a kingdom to steal." A minute. Adam makes a foray towards the computer. Tara shields the screen, and Sam stops him. Something, a phone I've never seen before. drops out of Adam's pocket amid the confusion. I pick it up and immediately see the texts. Plans to dismantle Harrison Industries for parts. Discussions with Marcus Grant. And something else. Dr. Collins' correspondence? Tara declares gleefully. It's done. Everything has been decoded. Adam becomes motionless. You should avoid opening that file. However, I already am. The room is filled with the voice of Richard Harrison, who made a video confession just days before he passed away. He gives names, explains plans, then offers a last surprise. Now that I finally understand, I tell Adam, the company was never yours to steal. Before he passed away, Richard made a revision to his will. He gave Emma the reins of power. Adam says, trembling, impossible. She was not born at all. I show him the will's date. Adam, he was aware. Almost everything, including the fraud, the affairs, and the agreements with Grant Technologies. You've been playing the exact game he anticipated the entire time. In the distance, police sirens blare. Adam's expression changes to one of rage. You believe you've triumphed? The board, the proof, and your signed confession are still with me. Check your phone, Sam murmurs. The one you just dropped, the real one. Evelyn's father pulling all support. Marcus Grant cutting agreements to save himself. The SEC renewing their investigation, and Dr. Collins sent one last message. I kept my promise, Richard. Adam's eyes widened as the messages poured in. The heritage of your granddaughter is secure. Adam collapses, his empire of lies crumbling around him as the police storm in. However, I'm already leaving while seeing Emma sleeping soundly at home. Some victories are about defending what's most important, not about winning. The turmoil from last night can still be heard in the Harrison Industries boardroom. The doorway is crossed by police tape, and the conference table where Adam's empire eventually fell apart is covered in evidence markers. Richard Harrison's personal files are in the leather portfolio that Dr. Collins hands me. He murmurs softly, when the time was right, he wanted you to have these. I discover a note inside, buried beneath years' worth of financial documents and business plans. Richard's decisive handwriting is still visible, despite the paper's age and the ink's fading. My beloved McKenna, you'll know by now why I picked you to guard Emma's inheritance. Not because you're Adam's wife, but because you saw what he couldn't. Stock prices and merger agreements don't measure legacy. It is ingrained in choices, in choosing to defend instead of destroy. Emma is fussy in her job. I reposition her blanket and notice my image in the shadowed windows. Somehow, I appear different. Stronger, perhaps, or simply more certain. Sam shows up at the door. The SEC wants to take another look at the video testimony. Evelyn Grant is also present. When Evelyn walks in, I anticipate fury, but all I see in her eyes is tiredness. According to her, the board approved the dissolution of the merger attempt. Daddy is resigning? She twists her now ringless fingers and rambles. The scandal, I tell her. I never wanted this. Most of it is true. Neither did I. Her expression softens as she turns to face Emma. He also promised me children, you know, a future in which I genuinely had faith. I respond, I know, since I did the same once. The doctor clears his throat. The new members of the board are ready. They will require guidance about the company's future. Richard's letter about choices and legacies comes to mind. Inform them that we are reorganizing, beginning with the charitable foundation. Funding for programs that assist single parents should be doubled. From where she sits at the computer, already working on the press release, Tara smiles. Our attention is drawn to a disturbance outside. I watch through the glass walls as federal officers carry Adam away, his flawless suit rumpled, and his confidence mask finally shattered. He looks at me and begins to say something, but I look away. There are some discussions that are not worthwhile. Dr. Collins pulls out another envelope and says, there's something else. Regarding Emma's trust, your father-in-law left detailed instructions. It's a challenge, not simply money. Projects for community investment must equal every dollar. Finally comprehending, I chuckle. He ensured that the legacy would not be taken. It must be earned. Speaking of income, Sam adds, corporate corruption and the price of truth. an investigative piece that recently went live, although I believe karma in the boardroom sounded more appealing. I decide no more karma as I watch Emma fall asleep. No more retaliation either, just moving forward. Dr. Collins' eyebrow goes up. And Adam? After closing Richard's portfolio, I said, we face justice through proper channels. I've had enough of his games. Evelyn gets up to go, but stops at the door. She nods to Emma and says, for what it's worth, I think Richard chose well, not just for the company, but for her. When she leaves, I stroll over to Richard's former workplace. His nameplate, which will shortly read Harrison Industries, Trust Management, is still displayed on the door. His presence permeates every thoughtfully selected detail inside. One final message, dated the day of his death, is slipped inside his desk calendar. Remember, knowing when to stop is more powerful than knowing when to fight. Fortunately, none of her father's calculations are used when Emma wakes up and demands attention. I pick her up and inhale that wonderful infant smell. Are you prepared to return home? From the doorway, Sam asks. As I grab our belongings, I correct him, not home. Going forward, reporters wait outside with inquiries concerning scandal and atonement, lawyers, reorganization plans, and countless decisions regarding Emma's future await us tomorrow. But now, in this silent triumph, I realize what Richard has known all along. Sometimes the best form of retaliation isn't demolishing what other people have created, but rather creating something better out of the ashes they left behind. My wife disappeared after a girls' trip, and now she's trying to manipulate her way back into my life, acting like nothing ever happened. It's common to hear statements like, I never saw it coming. That's precisely how it went for me, though. I was married to my wife for the entire 4 years that we were together. To be honest, I thought we were doing well. For the most part, I believe that we were in agreement, and we had plans and a life plan laid out. The problem is that we both desired children, or I believe that we both did. As soon as we were married, we began to discuss it seriously. She would constantly express her desire for 2 or 3 children, rambling on about the names we would give them, the nursery decor, and everything else. She would even spend time on the internet planning our future children's lives while perusing baby gear and clothing. It kept us connected and was sort of our thing to talk about. We were eager to begin this new chapter in our lives together, and everything appeared to be going according to plan. But after that, we received some terrible news, which really devastated me. We visited a doctor to find out what was wrong after a few months of trying to conceive. To cut a long tale short, it was me. The doctor essentially informed us that our chances of naturally becoming parents were very limited because my count was much too low. It felt like a stomach punch. I felt worthless. Our entire set of plans vanished in a flash. I was hit hard, terribly hard, by the news. I ended up for a while in a fairly awful position. I was a complete disaster at first, but therapy ultimately helped. At first, she seemed to be rather supportive, stating that it didn't matter and that she would be content with us alone. However, there was something strange about the way she said it, right from the start. She seems to have dropped it far too soon. She was all about starting a family one minute, and then she claimed she didn't need children to be content. I understand that people change their ideas, but her entire demeanor seems strange to me. From thinking about baby names, she had completely stopped talking about children. Furthermore, it seemed as though she began to view me in a different light. She would suddenly start making little jabs at me that she had never mentioned before, like how I wasn't taking care of myself, that I should work out, or that I should be more productive around the house. Yes, I could have gained a few pounds, but it seemed like she was constantly looking for reasons to accuse me. She would dismiss it when I questioned her about the abrupt shift in attitude. She would claim that I was being unduly sensitive and that I was only dreaming. But I was aware of a problem. She was different from the lady I married, the one who would spend hours sitting with me discussing our future. She wasn't particularly cruel, but there was a certain coldness about her, as if she had already mentally checked out and was merely doing the part. I suppose that, as time went on, I began to trust her when she assured me that everything was okay. In order to avoid coming out as needy or insecure, I quit pressing. In any case, after a few years, we were only getting by. We had gotten into a pattern where we hardly discussed anything important. We seemed more like housemates than husband and wife. She would always dismiss my attempts to discuss other choices, such as adoption or surrogacy, by stating that she didn't want to consider them. I never really believed her when she said, "As long as we're together, I'm happy." She seemed more concerned with persuading herself than I was. Suddenly, she informs me she wants to take a girls' trip. Now, traveling with her buddies was nothing out of the ordinary. She had previously done it a few times, and I had always encouraged her. For long, she talked about wanting to travel to America with her pals while we lived in Brighton. We had developed this trust over the years, so I didn't give it a second thought. I therefore made sure she had everything she needed, assisted her with packing, and drove her to the airport. I recall her final words before she departed. She turned to me and said, "Thank you for being so supportive." I found it a little strange that she would say that because I hadn't done anything particularly noteworthy, but she appeared so sincere that I dismissed it as her simply expressing gratitude. I remained up that night to make sure things went well by calling her when she landed. I kept myself occupied around the house, watching TV, keeping an eye on the time, and waited for her to text me to let me know she had landed, because her flight was expected to take roughly 9 hours. I called her to check in as soon as I noticed her flight had landed. The phone kept ringing, but no one picked it up. I didn't give it much thought because I assumed she was exhausted and might have gone directly to her hotel and crashed. However, when morning arrived, I still hadn't heard from her. I began to have this nagging concern in the back of my mind. I thought perhaps she was simply busy or her phone was on quiet, so I tried calling again and then texted her a few times. However, I was officially freaking out after a couple more hours of radio silence. In the end, I gave her sister a call to check whether she had heard from her. Nothing. I was really beginning to freak out by this point, in the hopes that something had gone wrong with her phone or that she just hadn't had time to check in. I even went so far as to call her companions, who were meant to be traveling with her. However, they were also perplexed when I called them. They did not accompany her on the trip. Back at home, they were enjoying coffee while seated 2 streets away. It truly hit me at that point. She wasn't traveling with any girls. She didn't have any friends. She hadn't accompanied anyone anywhere. She simply vanished. It seemed as though my stomach had fallen through the floor as I sat there with the phone. I was unable to comprehend it. Why would she tell me such a lie? Why wouldn't she notify me before leaving? I made an effort to persuade myself that it was an error of some sort, such as perhaps she had missed a connecting flight, or that she had been unable to contact due to an emergency. But I knew in my heart that she had this planned. Her expressing thank you for being so supportive and the entire girls' trip were all components of whatever she had been imagining. I was at a loss for what to do. I couldn't wake up as if I were living in a nightmare. I had never married a woman like this. I didn't even recognize this person. The coldness, the way she had stopped discussing our future, and those small digs about my appearance and health all began to make sense. I simply hadn't noticed, or perhaps I hadn't wanted to see, that she had been drifting away for a while. I just sat there looking at my phone that night, hoping for a call, a text, anything. However, nothing materialized, and I knew in my heart that it wouldn't. I remember lying there and staring at the ceiling when I woke up the following morning, thinking that it was all just a bad dream. But when she saw that her side of the bed was empty, reality set in. In fact, she had gone. After packing her bags, she disappeared. The promises I had given myself the previous evening, maybe she was late, or perhaps her phone died, were no longer valid. She had clearly planned this and wanted to go. I was completely in denial for the first few days. I would keep ringing her phone in the hopes of hearing her voice and perhaps receiving an explanation. I even left messages. I kept leaving them in the hopes that she would understand, even though I was half the time at a loss for words. However, I only received quiet, which strangely made things worse. It was as though I had been a stranger to her all along and had been left to work things out on my own, without knowing what had gone wrong. Her family was initially just as surprised as I was. They hadn't heard from her, and her mother didn't know anything about her plans. In the end, I visited there more times than I could remember, in order to speak with her mother and get answers. They must have felt sorry for me. When I couldn't bring myself to cook, her mom would prepare meals for me and occasionally let me stay there. She would sit there while I talked about all the tiny things that didn't make sense, attempting to figure out how my life had suddenly become so complicated. And to be honest, there were times when I was too numb to speak and just sat there in silence. I oscillated between rage, despair, and remorse. What went wrong was a question I kept asking myself. Was there a sign I missed? Was I not paying enough attention to her? On certain days, I would review all of our arguments and conversations in an attempt to determine what caused her to leave. I kept thinking about what I could have done better and how I could have preserved our marriage. It may sound dramatic, but I was completely preoccupied with figuring it out. It seemed as though the solution would somehow make everything better. I hardly slept or ate, and my work also began to suffer. People took notice. When they inquired about my well-being, I would just dismiss it by claiming that I was occupied with personal matters. Admitting the truth, the fact that my wife abandoned me without saying a word was embarrassing. I eventually told a few close friends, and they tried their best to divert my attention by bringing me out to hang out and encouraging me to move on. However, I would still ponder about her, wondering where she was and why I wasn't enough to keep her around. Even when I was with them, the incessant inquiries from strangers, including neighbors, relatives, acquaintances, and even former coworkers who had heard I was married, were among the worst aspects. It was like pulling out a new scab. Each time somebody asked, "How's married life treating you?" And "How's your wife?" I would just smile and tell them that everything was good, since I lacked the courage to tell them she had left. But each time I repeated that untruth, it felt more weighty. The only thing that worked in the end was therapy. Although I had never gone before, I realized I couldn't manage it alone after a few months of hardly functioning. In order to talk to someone who was impartial and unfamiliar with our baggage, I contacted a therapist and began attending once a week. It was beneficial. I would express my rage, betrayal, and the void she had left in my life. I would talk endlessly about the restless evenings and how I would lie awake, repeatedly reliving everything. The therapist assisted me in realizing that she would not have remained here if it had been a magical moment. It wasn't my fault. She made the decision to go. It was a difficult pill to take. I had the feeling that I was flawed and had somehow alienated her for a long time. However, I gradually began to see things differently. I chose to overlook her long-standing coldness and distance, assuming that things would improve on their own. I had persuaded myself that I could maintain my composure and that our marriage could be saved by my efforts alone. The realization that it wasn't hurt. As time passed, I began to restore my life in tiny increments. It wasn't until she departed that I realized how much I had lost in our marriage. I had always been the one who tried his hardest to make sure she was content and that our home life was comfortable. But now that I had so much free time, I was at a loss for what to do. I therefore began resuming old pastimes that I had forgotten about. I tried cooking new meals, went to the gym, and started reading literature I had been putting off. Eventually, the work also improved. I was hardly keeping up with my job at first, simply going through the motions. However, when I began to feel more like myself, I worked harder at my job. I felt like I still had control over something in my life, which was one of the few things that gave me a sense of accomplishment. Although I had always been skilled at what I did, I now give it my all. The extra hours, the concentration. I got a promotion as a result of it, something I never would have obtained if I had been moping about my problems. Even yet, there were painful days. A picture, an old movie ticket stub, or other small items that brought back memories I'd tried to forget would occasionally remind me of her. Looking at them, I would question her actions, whether she ever considered me, and whether she ever felt bad about what she had done. But gradually, those times began to disappear. I was able to let go of those memories a little more quickly and move on a little more easily each time. Additionally, I got back in touch with people I hadn't seen much of since getting married. We resumed our activities, including hiking and hitting the golf range, something I hadn't done in years. Having folks by my side who weren't involved in the mess and who could support me in moving on without pulling me back into the agony was a relief. In hindsight, I saw that I had invested much too much of myself in that relationship, in being her spouse. I felt like I had lost a significant portion of who I was when she departed, as if she had taken a piece of me with her. But I was rediscovering who I was, piece by piece. Although it wasn't quick or simple, I was making progress. I was finally able to see someone who wasn't defined by her past actions. When I looked in the mirror, at the conclusion of that year, I wasn't just the man whose wife had abandoned him. I had rebuilt, I had survived, and I was stronger now. I felt as like I could truly live my life without her shadow looming over me for the first time in years. To be honest, I took pride in that. I believed I had moved on from everything. After all that chaos, life had at last begun to seem normal again, or as close to normal as it could be. My work was going really well. My friends kept me occupied, and I had my routine down pat. Even my daily thoughts about her had stopped. Even while I still occasionally had flashbacks to odd memories, it wasn't as frequent as it used to be, when everything I did was somehow related to her. She was therefore the last person I expected to see standing there when someone knocked on my door one Saturday morning. But there she was, with a baby at my doorway. I went cold. It was like witnessing a ghost, and for a moment, my brain simply stopped functioning. Though perhaps a touch worn down, she still had her typical appearance. She looked at me as if she genuinely believed that I would be pleased to see her. I thought I was past caring. So yes, that really got to me. As it happens, meeting her again evoked many feelings I had previously suppressed. At first, I remained silent. I just stared as I stood there. As if nothing had happened, she gave me a smile before asking, "May I come in?" The nerve. Really, I mean it. She just shows up here as if I should be welcoming her back with open arms after everything she's done. However, I maintained my composure and told her, "No, you can stay right there," explaining that I didn't want her in my home, bringing all that commotion back into the one area I had created for myself. Despite her rather disoriented appearance, she remained in her spot and simply launched into her story. She began by saying, "I know this might be a shock, but I wanted to come back and explain everything." Her expression was hopeful, as though she truly thought I would be willing to listen. I was tempted to just close the door and laugh in her face, but I was too intrigued. I was curious about the reason behind her disappearance and what she had come up with. She continued by explaining that she had erred in leaving and that she had come to the realization that she had lost the greatest thing that had ever occurred to her. Not my words, but hers. She claimed to have thought a lot, and to have finally realized what was important in life after having this child. After years of ignoring me, it seemed that what mattered most was unexpectedly knocking on my door. "This is our second chance," she remarked, glancing down at the infant. What I was hearing was unbelievable. Our second opportunity? As if this child were some sort of magical reset button that would allow us to resume where we left off. I was furious on the inside, but I attempted to maintain a neutral appearance. She continued by adding that although she had made a grave error, we could now start over. Just the three of us. She wanted us to be a family once more. "Why did you leave?" was the final question that had been bothering me ever since she appeared. I tried to speak as steadily as I could, but I wasn't sure how much longer I could contain myself. Now that she was here, I needed to hear it from her, since I had tortured myself with all the possibilities for years in an attempt to comprehend. After hesitating and glancing down at her feet as if embarrassed, she finally told me the truth, or at least what I thought it was. She acknowledged that she had left because she wanted a child and had found someone who could provide one for her because I couldn't. She honestly stated it as if it were insignificant, as though she hadn't destroyed my life, and as though I should just nod and take it as gospel. She clarified that although the man she had left didn't stay, she had already given birth and had suddenly come to the realization that she wanted me back. Easy. I paused to think about what she was saying. She was here, confessing that she had left me, fled with a man, had his child, and now expected me to accept it. As if I should simply forget and forgive. "So you left, found someone else, had his baby, and now you think you can come back and pretend like nothing happened?" I asked her. She broke down in tears and apologized. admitting that she had made a big mistake. But I remained unmoved. She kept talking about how she knew she was supposed to be with me and that I was the one she really loved. To be honest, maintaining a straight face was difficult. She sounded so crazy that I was shocked. I could see it clearly on her face that this was desperation, not love. She then attempted to guilt-trip me by talking endlessly about how difficult it had been for her to be a single mother. In fact, she attempted to paint herself as the victim in all of this, acting as though her decisions hadn't brought her to this point. She assured me she was prepared to work things out this time and that she wanted my help. Who does she think I am? Was all I could think about. I listened to it all as I stood there, but I had had enough. I told her right away, you made your choice a long time ago, and now you have to live with it. There's no second chance here. She appeared astonished, as if she had never even imagined that I would say no, as if she truly believed she could simply saunter back into my life because it would suit her. She became irate just when I thought she would finally understand and depart. She became angry with me, accusing me of selfishness and demanding that I give her another chance to make amends. She said that she could have taken half of everything and divorced me at that time if she had so desired. She even had the audacity to remark that the house should still belong to her. I felt a surge of relief, as it seemed like her true self was revealing itself in front of me. At last, I was recognizing her true self. I refrained from arguing with her. I didn't speak louder. We're done. You wanted a different life, and now you have it. This isn't my responsibility anymore. I simply replied, looking at her, and then I closed the door in her face, interrupting her if she had any more words to say. I was struck with a peculiar sense of serenity as I stood there and heard her muffled screaming coming from the other side of the door. She might shout, cry, knock, or do anything else. However, I knew I would never allow her to return. This stranger who believed she could pick up the pieces when it was convenient for her took the place of the lady I had loved and married. Feeling lighter than I have in years, I moved away from the door and took a seat. I believe that was it after I shut the door behind her. I assumed she would understand and simply walk away. However, no. Rather, she began pounding on the door while shouting various things. The nerve seemed unbelievable to me. She had the gall to stand there and insist that I listen to her while I was in the one place that was truly mine. The only place I had been able to recover from the disaster she had left me in. I initially considered ignoring it and letting her scream till she became weary. But then I started to wonder. I was curious to know what kinds of excuses she would offer this time. I opened the door just enough to let her know I was paying attention, but not enough to let her in. She appeared to be astonished that I hadn't given her the response she desired, as if she had just been slapped across the face. As if we were having a typical argument and not coping with her abandonment. She began a lengthy monologue in which she expressed her willingness to forgive me for closing the door on her and her want to start over. She went on and on about how, if we both worked hard, we could work things out. I was unable to contain myself at that moment. I laughed. Really laughed. Because this woman had more nerve than I had ever seen. When I did that, she appeared enraged, as if I should feel guilty for not paying attention to her. I said to her, you left. You had your chance, and you threw it all away. I'm not just going to pretend none of that happened because you feel like it. Her face flushed, and she began to talk about how she had been so lost after leaving, and how she had discovered her error too late. You don't understand how hard it was for me, she said. However, I didn't believe it. I informed her that she had taken the decision to leave. She had plotted it, made up a falsehood about it, and then carried it out. Now her remorse meant nothing. That's when she lost it. Her entire tone shifted. She stopped doing the melancholy, repentant act, and began to attack me, accusing me of being unjust and lacking the grace to give her another chance. If I'd wanted to, I could have taken everything from you back then. I could have taken half of everything you own, she bravely said. I simply stood in awe. This woman, who had abandoned me without saying anything, now believes she should be compensated in some way for not attempting to defraud me. As if she was worthy of praise for not being as awful as she could have been. I replied, so what am I supposed to be grateful for? Grateful that you only ditched me And didn't take my stuff with you? Her expression was a mixture of rage and something more, possibly desperation or guilt, as she gazed at me. But to be honest, I didn't give a damn by then. I had just finished. That was where all the years I had spent questioning myself, feeling bad, and wondering if I was somehow to blame for her leaving vanished. I felt as though the burden I had been dragging about had finally been removed when I met her for who she truly was. But she wasn't finished. She began to pace my porch while complaining that I would regret not giving her another chance, and that I would never find someone like her. In fact, by refusing to take her back, she attempted to make me feel as though I was the one who was missing out. It was strange. As if I should be pleading with her to stay, here she was, the one who ruined everything we owned. She became even louder and continued to complain about how I had made her leave in the first place. When she realized I wasn't going to back down, she said that none of this would have occurred if I had been more understanding about the entire kid situation. Her reasoning seemed to indicate that I had failed her as a husband because I couldn't conceive, which somehow excused her from leaving to have a kid with someone else. The mental acrobatics were amazing. To be honest, I was shocked that she was attempting to blame me for her decisions. I straight up told her, "Look, if you wanted a kid that badly, you could have told me the truth. You didn't have to lie to my face and pretend everything was fine while planning your exit." To that, she had nothing to say, simply looked at me as if I had hit her. However, I prevented her from speaking. I said, "You made that choice all on your own, and now you've got to live with it. That's not my problem." She made one final attempt, returning to her dejected expression, and urged me to consider the boy and how I was being unjust by ignoring him. She literally exploited the child in her arms to make me feel guilty, as if I were the villain in this situation. However, I wasn't buying into it. I replied, "I don't know that child. I have nothing to do with him. He's not mine, and neither are you." That was the end of it. I could see her coming to terms with it at last. She was aware that I would never change my mind, and that I would never allow her to return to my life. I could see the rage waning and being replaced by something else, either genuine regret or simply exasperation. However, I didn't care. She had attempted to walk all over me and expected me to smile and give her credit. But now she was simply a stranger. For a few more seconds, she stood there as if she was waiting for me to decide to call her back. I didn't say anything else though. When it finally hit her that I meant every word, I just stood there and watched her expression. I closed the door without giving it another glance. I also didn't wait for her to rap on it again this time. In my heart, I knew that I had already made up my mind and that there was no turning back. I don't know, but I felt like I had finally won as I moved away from the door. It was over, even though she had spent so much time hoping to return and use manipulation to get back into my life. I had freedom. Neither for her nor for us was there going to be another chance. She was now only a memory, one that I had at last relegated to the past. I felt like I could breathe again after all those years of suffering and shame. And what do you know? It was pleasant. I experienced an odd sense of tranquility as soon as I shut that door behind her. I no longer felt sad, furious, or even astonished. It was as though all of the effort I had put into her over the years, all of the sorrow, the shame, and the never-ending wondering, had simply disappeared. I was prepared to move on since I had at last found the closure I didn't realize I needed. This time, everything was truly finished. But naturally, it wasn't as tidy a conclusion as I had planned. Her mother texted me a few days later. She apologized, stating she was embarrassed by her daughter's handling of the situation, and that she had attempted to reason with her. But clearly, it had failed. Her mother was a kind person. She had been quite helpful to me when her daughter departed, and I could see that she was truly distressed by the situation. Although I had nothing against her, I didn't want to be dragged back into that situation. I simply said, "Thanks for checking in response," and didn't say anything further. I wasn't going to waste time justifying my choice, and I wasn't going to offer her mother any more information. She knew it was over because she understood. I learned tidbits over the course of the following few weeks via social media and mutual connections. She had apparently returned to living with her parents, and things weren't going well. The father of the child, the man she had left me for, was not involved at all. He had bailed out. She was left to figure things out on her own, because, apparently, he hadn't committed to the long term. Few individuals were eager to help, because she had essentially burned every bridge. Her former friends, who had supported me when she first vanished, didn't feel sorry for her. They weren't eager to get drawn back into her drama, because they had all moved on. You can't hold them responsible. Her parents weren't too happy either. They didn't have enough money to sustain her and the child. I was aware of this since her father called me shortly after her mother texted me. Curiosity overcame me, and I nearly didn't respond. He was direct but courteous. He mentioned that they were having financial difficulties and suggested that I might be able to assist them in some way. He continued talking about the infant and how difficult things were for them, saying, "We know you cared about her once." I listened courteously, but I couldn't help but giggle a little, not aloud, but you get the idea. When he began to talk endlessly about how his daughter only needed a little help to get back on her feet, I politely informed him that his daughter made her own decisions, and that I was neither in a position nor in the right frame of mind to assist. Since he didn't pursue it further, I believe he understood the message. Before I know it, her friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years, began contacting me. Some attempted to use the guilt angle, claiming that she was going through a difficult moment, and that perhaps I could find it in my heart to give her another chance. She even had the audacity to say that the child needed a father figure, and that I shouldn't allow my resentment stand in the way of my efforts to assist him. However, I refused to back down. I refused to allow anyone to make me feel guilty for making my own decision at last. I had given that woman all I had after years of feeling inadequate, and she had tossed it all away. Instead of relying on me to save her, she should at least take responsibility for her decisions. The calls and messages gradually decreased in volume before ceasing completely. Everyone seemed to finally realize that I was serious, that I had moved on, and that I would not get ensnared again. That's when the true calm arrived. For the first time in years, my life felt peaceful and typical. One had my friends, my job, and my routines. I had rebuilt my life on my own terms, so it wasn't a fancy, glamorous one, but it was mine. The irony is that I once again began to discover joy in the small things, which I had not given much thought to when I was married. I would read novels I had been meaning to read for years, cook my own food, and take walks. It felt good to be free, and I understood that I could live my life as I pleased without anyone's approval. I wasn't always concerned about other people's happiness or approval. For once, I felt as though I had gradually regained my life. Occasionally, I would stumble into someone who knew us both, and they would inquire, "Hey, what happened to her?" I would respond with a succinct, courteous response, and shift the topic. I simply didn't want to keep going back to a chapter that was so obviously over. It wasn't that I was concealing anything. I had finally mastered the skill of leaving her in the past. When I last heard from her, things weren't going well. She was still jumping between her parents' house and friends' sofas after her welcome, and she was having trouble keeping a job. Occasionally, people I don't often communicate with would message me to let me know that she was seeking assistance from anyone who would listen. Some of them even implied that she hoped I would reconsider, that perhaps I would change my mind and end up playing dad to her child. However, that was not going to occur. I had already invested too much time and effort into rebuilding my life to consider taking that route. Her safety net was not going to be me. Just because things didn't go as she had hoped, I wasn't going to be the one to pick up the pieces. Nothing was going to pull me back into that chapter. I was finished. Ultimately, I believe I received the necessary closure. She was now coping with the repercussions of her decisions. And me? It was the first time since the day she departed that I felt completely, truly free. I had had enough of her looming over my life. I was happy that I had moved on. Not in a grand, dramatic sense, but simply contented. And what do you know? That was sufficient.